Hello, long time no see. I haven't posted for a while and uploaded anything for a while because I've been a little bit demotivated after the Boulanger game that I last uploaded, but I figure I will rectify the situation and upload some more this year. And I figured I would start by continuing the series the way I see it, that I started like 10 months ago and then abandoned because I lost motivation. So yeah, I'm going to try to upload a little more, and I'll start with talking about Mudfight. So just getting right into it, because we defined everything and talked about all the details earlier on Patty. Mudfight's a bit different than virtually every single other map in the ranked map pool, and the big reason is that it's open. Um, there's very little terrain features in Delta, which is frankly the most important zone. Foxtrot as well, Charlie, and really the most terrain features are in Alpha, in all honesty. Um, and all what this does is it makes the map very much about zoning. Mudfight is a zoning map where, frankly, the person who can zone the best will win. Um, so, yeah. The result of having so little terrain features in general is that there's not much local strategy to talk about across the whole entire map. And really, the map is more about zoning and how global strategy works. And specifically, because you can zone in very different ways depending on the different types of decks that you play, the way that you pick your global strategy and the way that you execute your global strategy to begin with is very, very deck dependent. I think more so than any other map in the map pool. Um, so yeah, without any more hesitation, let's just jump on in and talk about Alpha. So Alpha is the most terrain-rich feature in on Mudfight, and that's not really saying all that much because there's really not that much here. Oh, sorry. I'll be talking about doing the same exact process as last time in Patty, where I talk about the each individual locality, and then I talk about global strategy starting with top side or Echo, and then global strategy of Bravo or bottom side. Okay, so Alpha. This is the most terrain-rich feature on the whole map, and there's really honestly not that much here. It may look a little bit complicated, but compared to some of the forests in Paddy Field, it's not, and especially the forests in like plunging or sorry, not highway, punch bowl. It's really not that complicated here. Um, really, you playing on alpha more or less devolves into using standard line of sight tricks and playing wider, which I'll explain in a second. So, what's a standard line of sight trick? Um, Standard line of sight trick is where you try to generate these sort of one ways where you can shoot your opponents but they can't shoot at you. So an example would be where this AMX-10 is. Right here, it can see everything, and as a result, everything can shoot at it. However, if the AMX-10 reverses a tiny bit, you can see that in just a second, we're going to start to lose max distance, and a tiny bit more reversing to here, and now we don't have full range. So what this means is that if infantry walks out from this area and walks up to here, the AMX-10 can shoot at it, but any tank in this area can't. Playing on Mudfight in Alpha is a lot of this type of stuff. This AMX-10, for example, you can use this little forest right here to block off line of sight from this area, but you can still get line of sight to here. Um, and you can also pull off the same thing in this spot right here specifically. So I'll just fast forward real quick so that we can see this. So this forest right here is going to block a lot of the vision from here. However, we have full vision here, like this, and if we want to reverse a tiny bit, we can correct it a little bit more, as you can see. And you can play around with this. Um, on this side, in this area, there really isn't that much point in trying to do these fancy little line of sight tricks, just because it's harder to get to this area. So if you have fire sport here, you want to have a lot more full line of sight so that you can shoot at infantry coming in and prevent them from sneaking around. from this side right here, a lot of what you're doing for fighting in alpha is just pretty bare bones basic stuff. If you're pushing in from this direction right here, you have to be aware of this town block and not getting hit by 80 gems from here, which we'll talk about in a second. So maybe you don't want to necessarily put your tanks right here, but maybe you'll put your tanks more in this area. Because if we're here, and we try to offer fire support, we have full line of sight here. So we go a little bit further out, there we go. Full line of sight here, as you can see. You have to be a little careful because this juts out slightly. But we can't get shot at from here, or even from these far town blocks over there. Similarly, you can put fire support here, and you can put fire support here as well. It's not particularly complicated. It looks a lot more complicated than it is, but in actuality it's not. From this side, if you want to push into alpha, you can also play the same little tricks. You'll first be assaulting into this position and this position right here. So maybe you put your fire support in somewhere right, like here, for example, or right there in this area. And it's separate from your infantry, so it's safer from rocket pods, and it's safer from like an Uragan or something. And you can see here, and if you come out a little bit more, you'll also be able to see into this area as well. There's a little open spot right here, which makes microing tanks a little bit easier, because you can kind of go in and out of this pocket, and not get bogged down by as much forests. Beyond that, there really isn't that much to talk about in alpha, honestly, other than the typical mistakes that people make, and how to play and how to sneak into alpha. Again, this is not a very terrain-rich map. It's more a map about global strategy, so I'm going to kind of go quickly through this. So, the number one mistake that people make from both sides, so from bottom side and from top side, in taking alpha, is playing too narrow. What most people will do when taking alpha is they will basically play in... let me get that pen out. They'll kind of more or less play... sorry. Let's try that again. Kind of this area. Right here. And in all honesty, it's somewhat of a miracle if a lot of beginner players get to even like this area specifically. They mostly just play in this blue box and maybe the yellow bit. And this is honestly a mistake. It's a mistake because when you play really, really narrow, especially trying to get in and out of alpha, you're missing out on a lot of nice fire support angles. So, what do I mean by that? Well, say, for example, someone has infantry trying to cross like this right here. Now, because there is this little force that goes like that, it can be kind of hard to get from this area right here where my mouse is, fire support onto this crossing without exposing yourself to this area. So, in order to fix that, a very common thing to do would be to put like AMX 10s here, or in general fire support here, because now you have angles like that, which makes it a lot harder to cross. And you can pair that with your own infantry right here. So by not taking advantage of these firing angles, you basically make it harder on yourself to actually play into alpha. Additionally as well, because you have tanks that are so far out, now your opponent has to spend extra time dealing with that fire support, which is time that they're not spending pushing you. And they have to think about smoking and other angles. So that's one example of why these two positions right here are good. And why in general playing on this side is a good thing. Another example has to do with your opponent having, like, let's say we're the bottom side Bravo, and let's say that we have a kind of this control right here, so I'll actually use red. Like, this is kind of what a control looks like, something like this. And the blue 4 player has this area like that. depending on who has control of the town, pushing one way or the other way, right here, opens you up to the town block, and also it's just not good. It's very, very head on, and it's going to favor the more mechanized player who has lots of tanks. And if you're that mechanized player, great, good for you. You can still play this more optimally, though. From the blue side, these like positions here and here, for example, really limit your opponent's ability to cross this, and they have to deal with these two positions first. Um, and that's good for you. From the red side, if they can take these positions right here, now with red dots right here, they have even more firing angles onto the blue front, which makes it harder for the blue player to deal with. Additionally, that red player can come around like that and hit from behind. And these are concepts that just don't happen if you only play in that small little box that we drew earlier. Now, if we're in the blue player here, we can also do the same thing. We can come around behind like this and start causing problems for CVs or in general for this front, hitting retreating tanks and potentially changing the entire game. So this area right here is often not used very much, but it is extremely, extremely important in alpha, and probably the biggest mistake is not using it. There's also the fact that you can sneak around like this, or you can sneak around like that. And that's gonna, it may seem like a slow investment at first, and you may feel impatient. I personally am a very impatient player, so I didn't do this for a while until I forced myself to. Making this little investment of spending some points here to put like Gurkhas or VDV or Luzhendui or pick your favorite shocks or elite squad can really pay off because you can pick up like AA in this area or this area and CVs, and in general it means that your opponent is spending points there, and especially with those faster types of infantry you can really cause problems, especially during an ongoing alpha fight where your opponent has even more stuff to micro. So yeah, the biggest mistake is basically not taking advantage of everything past this black line right here. This also includes CV spots. The most common CV spots in alpha are like here and here, and then similarly this area and kind of this area right here. So if you're playing against a very CV snipey opponent, they're going to definitely target these areas, and that means the chances of you losing your CV are higher. However, if you're a little bit more patient, and instead you may put your CV somewhere in here, from the top side, or maybe somewhere in like this area from Bravo side, assuming of course you have enough control of the zone so that you can like prevent infantry from walking in, you might be able to save your CV and make your opponent waste their supply. So taking advantage of these farther out zones in alpha, even though they are harder to get to, is more often than not well worth the well worth this time invested. Now, on the topic of specifically sneaking in alpha, there's a very good way to do it, which I'll show you right now. So, oops. I'll talk about sneaking from the top side first. One of the favorite things I like to do for sneaking in alpha is with these Rima right here. What I like to do is I don't like to overly commit to one area. What I will instead do is I'll kind of hover around in this area right here. And that makes me very hard to pin down, because my opponent has no idea if I'll attack here, or if I'll just be hitting the supply lines that they're trying to reinforce. And Rima are especially good at this, or in general any sort of 20 Raider fire launcher infantry, because you can strike, get like side shots, so you'll probably one-shot whatever's there, and then you just fall back this way and you just kind of run around in random circles or whatever, which makes it harder for your opponent to catch you. And then you can also just come back in after some other point and strike again. This makes it very hard for your opponent to deal with you, especially if you're like have 20 rate of fire launchers or you're 15-man. Havyung can do the exact same thing. VDV, exact same thing, and so on and so forth. So you can come in here, get some pickups, and then as your opponent has to deal with this annoying squad that just won't go away, and they have no idea where it's going, because you just micro it to some random spot more or less, that leaves opportunities in alpha from here, for example, open for you to push this way or to apply pressure. From this side, you can do the exact same thing with Rima here. You can come down through here, and you can basically clear out this area. That's also a thing I forgot to mention. There's a little hill right here that's not, or parts of it like this area here, if I go back over, are not in forest, so you have to be careful of rocket pods when you cross this, and in general recon helicopters, so just like cross a little bit lower, like this, to avoid being detected when you're sneaking. Anyway, you can do the exact same thing here. It's not quite as effective just because of how the resupply roads into alpha work, but it's still pretty good, because if you can clear out this area and then start wandering around in here with your Rima or what have you, you know that if there's a CV, it's probably going to be in here, and you may be able to spot it. Probably not here, so you know it's going to be either here or here. And it allows you to apply some deductive reasoning very nicely to figure out what's what. Now, the one that benefits of sneaking on the bottom side is that you can get where the Legion are right now, and also that you can get into the town block, and into their spawn, sorry. If you can get your timing down correctly, you might be able to walk into these towns right here and really cause your opponents problems. This is a very, very risky move, but the reason why this move right here is good in particular is because it gives you alpha control, since they can't reinforce. This entire map is all about zoning one way or the other and denying your opponent the ability to get into one zone or the other, because there's so few zones and each one really, really counts. Additionally, as well, if you can get to this area, you can also sneak all the way into someone's spawn right here and also cause problems. You can maybe pop out here, or you can go into this area and then come behind and cause all sorts of mayhem. Yeah. So that's kind of the alpha area in essence, and how sneaking works, and just in general how it's played. It's not that complicated. You got to make good use of artillery if you have it, and some standard line of sight tricks here and there. But other than that, it's just more or less about playing the entire alpha zone rather than just playing only one part of the alpha. Yeah. So next thing to talk about is this town right here, which I'm calling Alpha Town, and which also happens to be where a lot of the game takes place in general. It's my personal opinion that top side of Mudfight is better, because in Alpha Town, the town fighting is a lot easier. And the reason why has to do with the shape of the town blocks. Because the town blocks right here come toward you like this, then what that basically means is that it's easier from top side to hide infantry here or here, in these farther back town blocks, away from fire support. That would be like in this area. Whereas if you are on the bottom side, then wherever you place your infantry, you're more or less always going to be visible to any sort of fire support right here, aside from this one town block. Like, for example, if I take these Commandos Para and I move them here really quickly, just so you can see. You can see that even here, we can potentially be visible to fire support here, which is quite annoying. It can be hard for this AMX to get fire support, to actually get line of sight on, though. But if we're in this town, for example, then we will definitely be visible, and especially here will be visible, and of course will be visible here, and similarly this town block as well. Whereas from this side right here, because we can just garrison up into this little town block right here, we won't be visible by the VAB like this because we just can't see through. And similarly, you're often pretty safe just in this town block right here from fire support here. So overall, this makes the town fighting in from topside a lot easier to play. Now, town fighting is pretty straightforward. You buy high quality infantry and you win, ideally with fire support. So I'm not going to talk about the town fighting that much specifically, other than it's usually easier from the echo or topside. What is really important though is why Alpha Town is such an important feature in this map. Actually, I want these commandos pair back here for now that I think about it. And the reason why has to do with zoning, which is basically the entire theme of this map. Let's just say that Topside has control of Alpha Town. What that means is Topside will put an AT-gem here, or unless they're playing US, but if they're not playing US, they have the moral imperative to put an AT-gem here. And if that's like a 2450, if a 2400 meter range AT-gem, 2450? Yeah, 2450. If that's 2450, you can see that's going to reach pretty far. And similarly over to here as well, you will reach very, very far too. Now, if you have recoilless rifles, or you want to put your AT-gem into these town blocks as well, you have a similar effect, except into alpha. As you can see, we can see up to here and into here as well, which makes using tanks or in general any sort of vehicles in this area, basically anything to the, from my perspective, to the right of this little like rectangle feature thing, kind of difficult. And it's another factor of smoke that the opponent has to worry about. So it really zones your opponent, and what that basically does from topside is it forces your opponent to go into these forests a lot earlier than they would like to, and that means they have to travel a lot through these forests right here, which is going to slow down the reinforcements and slow down the game and give you opportunities to basically make aggressive plays elsewhere in the map or into your opponent if you want to do that. From this side right here, from the bottom side, zoning is actually even more powerful than it would be on top side. And the reason why is that if we put, for example, our HGM in the most aggressive position, which would be right here, we will be able to see effectively everything. This right here is 2450. So you can see CVs in here, you can see AA in here, you can see basically everything in here. And then out here, you can see very, very far, and you can see these positions as well if you have recon to spot them, of course. So because basically this town block juts out so far from this into the enemy territory from this perspective, that makes this AT-gem spot very powerful. Additionally, because delta, which we'll get to in a second, there's not that much delta for the echo side to play with. You basically have this area right here. Now, on the topic of zoning, there are also other AT-gem spots and places and basically follow-up spots that you can put your units in. So where the AMX-10 is, for example, is another spot where you can put recon tanks, AT-GMs, or just sort of any sort of fire support or recon in general, because of just how far out you reach, which makes it very hard for your opponent to do things. Now, of course, the effect of having an AT-gem here, or an AT-gem here, or any other numerous places, I'll actually move this up right now, is that you force your opponent to go into this forest earlier than they would like. Now, unlike the bottom side forest right here, this forest doesn't kind of take such an aggressive slant in towards alpha, so you don't have in general as many movement issues on top side as you do the bottom side. Again, that this is in all honesty, this is pretty minor, and I don't want to be coming off like I'm saying that top side is absolutely superior, and if you get bottom side, you're just done for, because there are benefits to both. I think the main benefit from bottom side has to do with Alpha Town, where once you have Alpha Town, you push up past Alpha Town, putting zoning material here is incredibly strong. Um, you can even shoot all the way into here, for example. So zoning by having control of Alpha Town and being able to zone, it's much more powerful than it would be from doing the same type of exercise from topside. So how do you take Alpha Town? Well, actually, sorry. Before we do that, no. How do you take Alpha Town? So because this map is all about zoning, that means recon is also really important, and specifically recon presence. And being able to have good recon spots will allow you to take Alpha Town or defend Alpha Town a lot easier. Defending Alpha Town will be easier because if you have recon in really good spots, it makes it harder for your opponent to actually gather fire support easily. And if you have recon in good spots and trying to take Alpha Town, you'll spot every single ATGM that fires and every single infantry in there. So the most common recon spot for taking Alpha Town is right here where these commandos paired are. If you can get your infantry all the way up, and if you want to be really fancy, you can go something like that to get it like to the very edge. You can actually spot like good stealth. You can spot good stealth units in here potentially. Here's going to be a little bit iffy, but here you definitely can. And because you're so close, you'll be able to spot pretty much anything that fires from here. Similarly, if you can get recon up to here as well, or like especially like if you have special forces recon like Jedi, KCT, Jaeger, this is also a really good spot. It's a lot harder to reach because, well, there's a lot of gaps right here. But if you can force your opponent out of this area and you have lots of fire support here, that means you might be able to just walk in and like that and take the town eventually and cause a lot of problems. There we go. I forgot to talk about this, but this is also in general a good recon spot for Alpha, this area. From the bottom side. This is more useful for bottom side than top side. But what you can do is you can basically place recon far enough back here, and you can spot whatever your opponent is trying to do. Because you're going to, aside from this one little narrow spot right here, which is totally okay, you're going to basically have full line of sight on everything that you want to have line of sight on. Anyway, back to Alpha Town. So these recon spots right here from bottom side are very good. Now, another very strong recon spot is actually this bush right here. If you can get recon to here, either because you lost Alpha Town but you left recon here, it makes it very hard for your opponent to actually hold this area. Because if you can walk recon all the way up through here and avoid this little open gap right here specifically, because you can die crossing this, you will actually be able to spot infantry in here, here, and in here. You'll spot like proletary. You'll spot good. You'll spot anything with good, good stealth, and with very good stealth, it can be a little bit finicky depending on exactly which little building they're in. But you can do a lot of good spotting here. And if you can actually get recon here from bottom side, it makes it very hard for your opponent to actually place infantry in a safe spot. You're more or less forcing them to this town or to this town. And if they're here, you can arty them, you can bomb them, or you know exactly where they'll be for your fire support. So recon spots are really important for taking Alpha Town and for holding Alpha Town. We're holding it because you want to deny your opponent that recon spot, and ideally you'll probably kill their recon as it approaches, and you basically make it harder for them to spot your ATGMs, which effectively also makes zoning easier. So how do we attack and how do we defend? I actually need a mortar now to think about it, so I'll grab one of those real quick. Okay. So how do we attack and how do we defend? Well, this is kind of the prototypical town block you use for teaching people how to smoke. And if you want to take the town, so if we are on the top side and we want to take the town, if you have like auto cannons, you can basically place your auto cannons where this AMX-10 is right here. And the reason why is that you'll have great vision on pretty much everything, as you can see. And you're far enough away, aside from like VDV or Legion 90, or in general ARX teams, such that you'll be okay. You can also place fire support back here, but if you're an autocannon, you may lose accuracy, but you will be safer. So how does the smoking work? Well, it's just any normal smoke. You smoke behind the town blocks right here, like this, to deny the opponent the ability to use their fire support, and you force them out if they want to. And meanwhile, your fire support right here is totally unimpeded. So this is just all standard stuff. If we are on bottom side though and we want to defend, what you do is you actually want to smoke in front of your infantry right here, like this, to deny the opponent the ability to use their fire support. Because if we have alpha and we're trying to defend it, we have the advantage of being in the town, and the opponent will be purely relying on their fire support. So this is just how we cut them off. You really gotta make sure to smoke in front of the town. And this is something that is very common in openers for a player who plays a more motorized type of deck, or just in general the player who is able to get the town first. As you can see here, maybe I should get supply trap while I think about it. As you can see here, the opponent, if they want to actually approach you, they have to go through the smoke, and then they'll be in range of your AT weapons, which is good for you. From bottom side, if we want to attack, it's a little bit harder because we don't have any really nice spots like this for putting our vehicles. So you kind of will store a lot of your units here, and in Alpha right here specifically, a lot of your fire support. And you'll do the same thing. You smoke behind like this to deny the opponent the ability to use their fire support, and then you'll have all your fire support here. It's all pretty standard. From this side right here, if we're defending, it's the exact same thing. We usually smoke right here, like this, so that it's just the infantry and any sort of vehicles that come into AT range. And usually we don't have to worry about this area all that much, but if your opponent really likes to play into Alpha to take Alpha Town, then you do have to worry about this. But smoking out this area is usually not my first instinct, because I don't want to also give my opponent the opportunity to make progress into Alpha. Okay. The next thing to talk about is this town block right here specifically. This town block right here specifically is special because this little gap right here and this little gap right here. What that allows you to do is, if you want to run down tanks or use your own fire support, you don't have to go all the way around the town like this and then come through. Or actually, I did it by want to do by accident. You don't have to go all the way around like this and then right here, which is what you normally have to do with dense town blocks like these. Because I'm assuming that if you're watching this video, you know that if I try to move through this town block right here, straight across, it's going to take you a long time, and you're going to pop out showing side and then die. However, because these little town blocks have this little gap right here and this little gap right here, you don't have to go all the way around, and you can basically run down tanks through here, like this, from this side. Or more commonly through this one right here, just because it's easier to micro. From bottom side, though, this is very, very useful for actually engaging enemy fire support. Because what your opponent will do if they're trying to take Alpha Town is they will have their fire support in this area usually. Or their tanks here, or whatever. So what you can do is, if you have a big tank, pretend this AMX is a big tank, you actually get line of sight right here, which they may not expect. And you can pick off their IFVs and get a lot of free pickups. And you can do the same thing into this area. And if you control enough of Alpha Town, you can also push and pull off the exact same thing, except they have a lot of open space in which they can go to, so they'll probably have a bad time. where there's a slightly less open space here, so you have more terrain to work with to hide your tanks and whatnot. But these two open little town blocks right here, very, very useful for running down tanks from either side, and also for just killing IFVs, or any sort of fire sport in general. And the last thing to talk about for Alpha Town is how to play tanks in Alpha Town. How do your tanks work? And for that, it really depends upon if you as a player want to engage the enemy tanks, or if you want to use your tanks as more fire support and protect yourself from the enemy tanks. One of the great benefits about Alpha Town like this is that because it's a town block, you can't shoot through it unless it's these areas, but you can't shoot through it for the most part. So what that means is that you can use this effectively as a giant permanent smoke cloud. Where, let's just say, for example, that we want to protect our tanks, and the opponent's tanks start off right here. So actually, I will use the VABs now that I think about it, just so that we have some slightly different units to look at. So, if we're at the AMX 10 here, and we want to protect ourselves against these VABs, or other big tank, I suppose. If we see the VABs moving this way, because we have recon like right here, what we do is we want to move our AMX 10s the opposite direction. And you can see that if we do this, the town block will protect us from these tanks right here. And if we move all the way out right here, we can still keep on doing fire support duties here. And of course, we're not going to be moving so close to this town block, and because you are rotating by this town block, you have to move earlier the farther out you are. But that's the idea. This is for what we want to do for protecting. If they try to engage like this, then what we would do is we would move the opposite direction, keep on offering fire support, and this is great because they can't engage us, we can't engage them. There's like some finicky stuff that happens here, but 9 times out of 10 that never comes up unless you're stopped, because you just don't have enough time to aim in general. So that's kind of how protecting works. So, for example, if you'd like to play with lighter tanks, like let's say you're playing USSR and you're doing like a triple TADB opener, what you can effectively do is you can basically play through 3 TADBs into this area, and if you see their bigger tank move this direction right here, you move the opposite direction, and you make sure that you don't get hit by ATGMs from here, which we'll talk about in just a second. Similarly, you can do the exact same thing here, which is often a bit easier because there's more open space. You can choose to run tanks down if you want, and you can basically close the distance with smoke, or you can just keep on offering fire support and force your opponent back into one of these 2 town blocks right there. So now, on the flip side, if you want to engage the opponent's tanks, what you do is you want to move to the exact same direction that they are in, and basically you'll hope that they're not going to move this direction, or that they want to actually take that engagement. And I talked about like why these 2 little gaps right here are great for this type of play, specifically from this side. And you can get as pretty close if you want to, and then pop out pretty suddenly like that. Or you can go into this more open area to engage the enemy tanks here. This going to the left on this side is slightly riskier, just because you can have an ATGM right here that can shoot at you. So you have to be very, very mindful of where the ATGMs are and Delta if you want to take this engagement, which is why generally tank engagements happen farther back in this area in Delta, which we'll talk about in just a second. But yeah, that's the basics on how tank fighting works for Alpha Town. If you want to have your tanks primarily as fire support, you dodge the opponent's tanks using the town block right here, and if you want your tanks to be killing other tanks, then you try to move into them, where these little areas right here are great for getting that type of surprise fire support. This especially works well for Red 4 tanks, where you have like fast AT-gems in your tanks, and you can shoot through these town blocks right here and chase tanks down that way and get surprise hits. So yeah, that is Alpha Town, and next to talk about is Delta. This is very, very, very clearly a terrain-rich zone, because you can see that there's so much forest which you can hide all of your fire support and infantry, and oh wait, that's actually not the case. So even though there is not that much forest and terrain in Delta in general, the little terrain that there actually is pretty important for doing one thing or the other. Now, because it is so open, though, the first thing to talk about is recon. Applying recon pressure in Delta is extremely important. I haven't exactly defined this yet, but recon pressure is, in essence, is putting your recon into a functional state. So making your recon functional recon, where it spots enemies and forces them back. Because if they don't move back, they die to planes, already AT gems, or whatever. That's what recon pressure is. Applying pressure to your opponent by forcing them into suboptimal positions. So because Delta is so open, recon pressure and recon play in general is pretty important. So for basically advancing your recon, we'll start with bottom side first, or sorry, top side first. Actually, we'll move this back here. This, like this, and let's put this here. Okay. So, quite possibly the most common recon spot in Delta is like this little strip of forest right here. The reason why is that it's pretty far out to the opponent. You can see a lot of stuff. They're not gonna be able to hide tanks here, which is, oops, I'm not meaning to take them along with me. They're not going to be able to hide tanks here, or in general any sort of non-stealth vehicles. And it's also close to the action over here, so you can spot if their tanks are trying to rotate this way as well. Recon here is also another pretty common spot to prevent your opponent from pushing this direction. So, yeah, these are the two common spots right here. This also exists. It's slightly less common just because you don't see as much into this area, but it's still totally fine if you want to put like a recon unit up in this area as well. There's nothing wrong with that, just slightly less common. Same thing with here. The reason why this one right here isn't done as much is because you don't really have many places to retreat to, as you can see, where we have our dense hedged farmland here, and then very quickly just drops off. So yeah, from this side right here, the common recon spots are like here where these commandos para are, and then either like this spot right here, or push farther out depending on what you're trying to do. And this is also not assuming recon spots in Alpha Town specifically, which you should also use. So what does recon pressure actually look like? So the classic thing to do on this map is basically kicking out the opponent's recon and moving your recon up. So what you could do is, if you have more fire support than your opponent and their tanks aren't in the picture, either because they're damaged, about to die, or retreating, what you can do is you can take your recon and you can move it like this into the opponent's recon. And they're going to spot you first, obviously, but eventually you'll get closer to spot them if they stick around here. And it's at that point that you have line of sight with all of your fire support onto them, and they'll get stunned and die. So, once these commandos para are gone, and we have our own recon right here, and we push it up, like this, I'll just speed the process up right here. And we put it in basically the most aggressive position, which would be like this area. All of a sudden, our opponent has a very hard time doing things. And that's just because now that we have recon here, we know exactly what they're bringing into this area. They can't put CVs anywhere, or if they have a CV, we know it's an infantry CV here or here. And also, we can see pretty far. We can see all the way over to here. I don't remember the very good optics distance off the top of my head, but I'm pretty damn sure that we can see this far out. And similarly, we have lots of vision here and here. That effectively means that we have we can make aggressive plane plays. We can do aggressive zoning, and it just makes it harder for your opponent to actually do things. So that's the advantage of pushing this way. You can do the exact same play here, where if you have fire support like here, and you have fire support like here, for example, maybe here, just taking this. You make the exact same play where you just walk you walk your recon infantry into theirs. You spot theirs, and then you open fire and you kill them. And then you push up to here and you'll start spotting their units here and any AA or sort that they have stored in this area. Um, that's just kind of how it works from top side. From bottom side, it's the exact same thing, except that you have to be a little bit more mindful of ATGMs, which we'll get to in a second, because of how much space the bottom side ATGMs occupy in Delta. But it's essentially the same drill. You take your fire support and you walk into theirs. Sorry, you take your recon infantry, you walk into theirs. You kill the recon infantry so they can't see anything, and then you establish ATGMs and recon in good positions. This is important because your opponent can't actually make any plays without recon, or else there could be a zillion ATGMs they'll never see that will kill them. Like if you're playing Baltic, for example, and you're able to pick off all your opponent's recon, you just put spikes everywhere, or BMP-1 TJJs, or whatever, and they're going to have a very unfun time pushing you. So, pushing up to here with your recon infantry is always nice. The real prize, though, is pushing into this area, actually. Because if we are on bottom side, and we are able to get our recon infantry to here, then they have zero ability to obviously put any sort of units here. But additionally, on top of that, we're very close to Delta Town, which can help us prep an attack into Delta Town. And then we can also put ATGMs here, which help zone out Delta Town and help zone out this area as well. So from bottom side, this area here is the real prize. It's very hard to get to, though, just because you have no idea what's going to be in here, and you have to do a very good job of killing your opponent's tanks and their ATGMs. But yeah, that's recon pressure. Very, very important for actually doing anything in Delta. Just kicking out the opponent's recon and putting your recon in aggressive positions. Now, when doing this, you can't just advance willy-nilly, because if you do that, maybe there's recon vehicles you didn't account for, maybe your opponent's tanks didn't die all completely, maybe you don't have enough AA and then you get bombed, and now you're the one who has to rebuy recon, and there are a lot of what-ifs. So, when you make these types of plays, in general, it's better to be safe rather than sorry, because rebuying recon in Delta is a pain in the ass. And you can, especially against decks like Eurocore, Landjet, or DGC that have Tigers, lacking recon can be really, really painful. Also against a deck like Blue Dragons, where you can get screwed over by a ninja piece that's in combo, and you just can't spot the ninja. So it's important to make sure you have enough fire support so that you won't die in the open, because you are crossing the open, so it is dangerous, and that you have pushed the tanks far enough back, and that you have ability to deal with fire support from here, or from this side you have ability to deal with fire support, and this area is just kind of chilling. So in general, when you make these types of pushes, it's better to be safe rather than sorry, but don't take this to mean that you should only push exactly when the conditions are right, because for any action you take there will be a little bit of risk, and if it's not risky, frankly, you should have already done it, or you shouldn't be doing it in the first place. So, last thing to talk about in Delta is where exactly to place your tanks from each side. And I actually probably should just get tanks to show this with, now I think about it. Okay. So, even though there's so much open space here, placing your tanks in Delta in particular is actually pretty important, because you don't want to accidentally lock on to terrain features. What can happen very easily is maybe you click out if you're playing a little too close to the town like this, where there's a bush right here, and you have a big smoke cloud going. So we have a lot of smoke right here in this area, and we try to push out like this, and we take a pop shot, and we reverse backwards, all of a sudden you can get accidentally locked onto this terrain right here and slow down. It'll be a lot easier to see with an actual Leclerc, and going at normal speed. So here we are, like this, and if we're trying to push out right here, we slow down, and that slow slowdown might be the difference between being able to chase a tank down or not. Additionally, if we want to push this way, like here, and we hit that feature, that might give time for the tank to run away. Most importantly, though, is for us running away, where if we are too close, so we can replicate it, to this terrain feature right here, we don't realize it, and we hit reverse back because we were injured. You'll see it in just a second, hopefully, if I did this correct, if I messed up correctly. There we go. This is what happens very commonly, where you're reversing back, but you're going very, very slowly because you're locked onto this little hedgehog right here. And more often than not, that is the difference between losing your tank to an ATGM plane because you can't run away fast enough, or getting chased down by other tanks. So that is very important to avoid. So what I usually do is I try not to play with my tanks in this area right here, just because it's so easy to get to accidentally move into the town if you miss micro, or to get locked into this train feature here. And what I try to do is I try to play with my tanks instead between these two hedgerows, if I can help it, or in this area right here, because it's a lot harder to get locked onto this because you can see it, and I personally find it easier to avoid this little hedgerow right here, because once the smoke clears, which we'll see in just a second. Okay. So once the smoke clears, which you can see right now, if we want to advance past here, with our tank, we don't really have issues, as you can see. But if we want to advance past here, and we want to, for example, turn to the left, we may hit the town. So what I like to do is I typically like to play between these two hedgerows right here, or if I want to play a little farther out, I'll play into here, and take fights that way, just because there's less opportunities for me to miss micro, and the micro itself is just in general easier. From this side right here, there aren't really, honestly, that many special terrain features to keep in mind. You can play with your tanks pretty much wherever. I would just avoid the spot where your recon is. So what I usually like to do from this side right here is I'll get my recon moved up to here in the opener, and they'll try to get this far out, very far, like this. And the reason why is that this makes it easier for me to micro my tanks, because my recon will not be that close to my tanks, so it'll be safer from artillery, it'll be safer from other tanks as well, and because it's so far out, I might be able to see around, if someone's playing with their smoke right here, for example, and playing too close to town, I might be able to see around their smoke like this, which is very important. It's also another great advantage, like these spots right here, if you can get to them, because you can see around someone's smoke. So if you have an LGB playing like the Kernas, GR7, Q5D, or whatever, you can basically shoot them and you're totally fine. Or you can go around with an ATGM plane from this angle and get side shots. Whereas if you had your recon like right here only in the opener, you wouldn't be able to do that. So that little tangent aside, I typically like to play with my tanks basically in this area, sort of. Let me zoom out a little bit. Kind of like here is where I like to play with my tanks usually. I don't like going too far out into this area because it's too close to this town and here and other ATGM spots. And you also give your opponent the opportunity to put fire support here and take the town back. So yeah, that's where I'd like to put my tanks in general. Now, I know this is a little bit jumping ahead of global strategy, but what's really, really important when you play this map is where you leave your tanks when if you're not using them. because no matter because unless you're a truly perfect player, which nobody is, you're going to encounter opportunities where you just will not be able to use your tank all the time. So now you have the question of, do you leave your tank in Delta right here, or would you take your tank farther back into this area? Like I'm assuming your big tank group. Um, and you typically want to leave your tanks in Delta. Um, I'll elaborate more later, but if you see your opponent's tank really far out right here, or if they retreat really far out to this way because of maybe afraid like an SU-27M or an MLU or whatever your favorite scary ATGM plane is, this actually leaves the entire side of the map open right here where your opponent can make aggressive plays. And they can play off that. However, if you retreat your tank back into Delta right here instead, either this far or in these areas if you can help it, your opponent you don't give your opponent necessarily that opportunity. So when you retreat your tanks, you want to try to keep them, your big tanks, you want to keep them in Delta as much as possible, and you want to let your smaller tanks play into Alpha, where the distances are closer, so it'll be more cost effective. But also your bigger tank can defend against this, defend against put things pushing in, and then, but most importantly after that, it's a lot easier afterward to make aggressive plays back into Delta. Same thing applies from this side right here. If you retreat your tank like to this area right here, and you can hide it enough so it won't get R8 or hit by AT gems or whatever, then you can pop out and you can make aggressive plays and you can defend against this if you need to. But you're in the center, you can actually do things. However, if you instead were forced to retreat all the way to like this area over here, just because of how the circumstances worked out, you can see that as you go farther and farther and farther this way, this side of the map is very open for play, and you will just be out of play entirely, and you're basically down, in this case, 165 points or more potentially. So it's important to keep your bigger tanks that you're playing with, that you're like doing a lot of tank micro with, around Delta for aggressive plays and for defending if you have to do that. Okay, and that is Delta. Yeah, sorry, I actually forgot. It's not quite Delta. I forgot about how to push Rectangle Force right here. And then that's Delta. So when you do this, when you actually make aggressive plays into Rectangle Force from this side right here, you don't want to keep your tank right here and push this way. Because if you do that, bad things will happen. So if the red 4 player has like an ATGM here and here and here, and the blue 4 player decides to go like this, what happens is the red 4 player has all of these angles onto you, and even good players will mess up this micro right here. They will get their tank side shot. And they will be in for a bad time. There we go. Okay. So going off that blue arrow is not a good idea. However, if we have the same set, so our opponent has ATGMs like here, here, or like any of these spots right here, and we instead play like this or like this, this distance right here is a lot longer, and any of these 3 ATGMs all fire at the exact same angle. So this might not even be able to actually have the distance to hit your tank. And if you're really, really cautious, you don't even take this arrow right here. You instead just focus on this blue arrow. And in doing such, oops. This is no longer in play, and all these ATGMs come from the exact same angle. So when we push here, what we usually do is we usually go like this, keep our tank farther out into Delta to avoid the ATGMs here, and we already have our recon presence moved up, and then we can make use of like this road right here to go like that, or we can go like that potentially, and we just try to avoid any sort of ATGMs from this area as much as possible, and fight everything head on to avoid giving our opponent angles. From the other side, if you want to push, so we have our Leclerc right here. move this back now. I'm just from the other side. If you want to push and push farther up into Delta, you basically already have to have Alpha Town, and that's going to give you all that great zoning potential. So we're the red 4 player now. You actually want to keep your tanks more so in this area rather than in this area right here. So I'll actually make this in black so it's easier to see. So you want to avoid going too close to here, and the reason why is that there's going to be whatever AT gems there will be right here, which will be very close to, but there may be stuff here, here, or here you haven't quite gotten rid of, and you're giving your opponent angles. So if you instead play here, well, sorry, these are blue dots, my bad. This is a blue line. So instead, if we're playing like in this area right here, and we push here, yes, there are AT gems here to worry about, but they're farther away. And the smoke can be is basically a lot easier for us to smoke our tanks to avoid getting hit by these AT gems, rather than all these these 4 different angles right here potentially, if we haven't removed them yet. The best way to deal with this, though, in all honesty, is just to get recon presence like in this area or this area right here to avoid getting hit by AT gems that you can't see, because then you'll spot the AT gems and kill them from wherever they are at. But yeah, that's kind of how Delta works. Next up, we got Delta Town. Delta Town is very important for topside not to lose, because if the red 4 player controls Delta Town, there is tremendous zoning potential, because they get an AT gem right here. Forget it. Everything dies here. I get side shots here, or an AT gem here. They can also start seeing into Foxtrot like this. There's tremendous zoning potential, and you're gonna, in essence, you'll leave more or less only like this little area for the blue 4 player to be safe in. So it's very important that topside does not lose Delta Town. The flip side of all, not flip side is the wrong word. The benefits of being on topside, though, is that it's very easy to hold Delta Town in the opener, because the timings in the opener specifically, and then by extension the timings later on, make it so that your reinforcement time to Delta Town is faster than your opponent's. Delta Town also gives you zoning potential into here, here, and these areas as well. You can actually see almost up to this road, not quite. So it's a lot of great zoning from both sides. It's hard to take just because of the timings that are involved here, and because maybe your opponent can rotate to make things hard. So yeah, if you can get Delta Town, that's absolutely wonderful, but it's typically pretty hard. Usually the time to attack Delta from the bottom side is either right in the opener or after you've killed a lot of tanks. We'll get to the ladder later on, and why we would do the ladder. But in the case of the former, if you want to take this in the opener, usually you have to use a lot of helicopters and a lot of motorized units to get here as fast as possible, and to deny the opponent the ability to get into here. And you have to keep in mind that if you do this, most likely you will be down in KD in the opener, because you can lose a lot of units here to things you don't expect. And you have to really play off your positional advantage once you have that, or else if you don't, you're kind of fucked. But we'll get to that later. So yeah, that's Delta Town. It's just a town fight. If you're actually doing the town fight part, try to avoid helicopters. Only go to like these front towns right here. If you're attacking Delta Town, of course. If you have a lot of control and you can protect yourself against helicopters and such like that. Otherwise, if they're pushing in, they have a lot of fire support. You may want to hang back into these town blocks right here, where it's harder for your opponent to use fire support. But yeah, that's Delta Town. There really isn't much to Delta Town. Next is Fox. So Fox is pretty similar to Delta in the sense that there's really not that much terrain to work with. If you're trying to push out this way, of course. If you're trying to push into Fox this direction, there is more terrain to work with. But it's still pretty tedious, post-opener at least. So, yeah, when you put, like Delta, attacking Foxtrot from either pushing out or pushing in is a lot of recon work. It's a lot about getting a fire support into the correct spots and then moving your recon up slowly and dealing with your opponent's fire support and good ATGM placement. So the first common recon spots are where these commander pair are right here. And the idea, I'm going to be a little sloppy. Okay, maybe not, I guess. The idea basically is you want to move these up through this bush as much as possible. Let's get this out of the way. You want to move these up through the bush as much as possible, and you'll start detecting where enemy fire support is, and you'll make it harder for them to place infantry, and you'll make it harder for them to place vehicles in general. Now, there is a gap right here, as you can see, but you go back to a more forested area right here, and then there's another gap right here. So there are really two gaps, one right here, and then one right here you have to watch out for. If you can basically push up those safely after you've dealt with enemy fire support, you can get up to this far. You'll do a really good job of making sure that your opponent can't use ATGMs easily and can't reinforce this area easily as well. And naturally, what you want to do is you want to have your recon follow up. You want to have your fire support and your ATGMs follow up behind. Getting from here to here is a very slow process, and it's important that you take your time when doing this, and that you don't rush it. Because if you rush it, then that gives and you lose your recon, that gives your opponent time to make advances. The other spot you can put your recon is like in this area right here and move it up through here. This is a bit more complicated because there are lots of little gaps, as you can see. So you have to be even more cautious here. But as you move farther and farther up, you really deny the opponent the ability to place units here. Last little thing you can do in Fox is from Delta Town right here, you can take recon infantry and you can move out with the idea of putting it like in this area. Again, this can be hard to get to because your opponent has all this fire support right here. You'll probably get obliterated, so you may have to do some smoke work, and you may have to have your own tanks nearby to counter this. But if you can get to here, you'll really start spotting a lot of your opponent's units and apply recon pressure and making it hard for them to do things. From bottom side, it's more or less the same story, except that if you can get past all of this complicated stuff and get to here, your life tends to be a lot easier. So pushing recon infantry from here to here is in essence the reverse of the process that we showed earlier, and same thing here. So that's not worth going over. However, as you get farther and farther up, and you can start to basically control these roads right here, and you make it such that it's easier to reinforce, that makes it easier to bring fire support in because it's a nice straight long road, easier to bring more ATGMs in, and zoning becomes easier as well. When you take with Foxtrot though, like the interesting part of Foxtrot from bottom side is once you get to this position right here, we can start to put units here and here. If you can get like units fire support into all the way through here and clear this area out, then you start to be in a pretty advantageous spot because if we go up a little farther, you can see that we now get free side shots on all their stuff. Now, you ideally want to do this with a big tank or with a recon vehicle, so it's harder to spot or harder to kill. You do have to keep in mind that as you do push up along Foxtrot through all these little forested areas right here to this area, you are incredibly close to the air spawn, so you have to have copious amounts of AA, and you have to be very cautious. Additionally, as well, you have to keep in mind that your opponent might have fire support right here in this area, so you don't want to necessarily make too aggressive plays. So really the only interesting thing about Foxtrot is taking this area right here. When you take this area, you want to have recon pushed up sufficiently far, and you also want to control this area. It is a mistake to only push from one direction, because if we for now just count out this area right here, and we have whatever units that we have right here, and we only try to push it from here, then because of the reinforcement times are so short for our opponent, we will lose this. We will lose this fight right here. So you have to be pretty fancy and push from two directions if you actually want to make this work. So maybe what you could do is kind of like crappy infantry push from this direction here, and your better infantry walks across a smaller area to get side shots and to force your opponent into an uncomfortable spot. And ideally what you would also do is you would use some sort of MLRS to soften them up, or priests if you're playing Entente to do that type of work as well, or whatever your favorite sort of arty is. Usually you're not going to be able to do this unless you're already winning and you just kind of have to close out your win, or if it's pretty early on in the game and you're doing this in the opener and the opponent won't have much stuff here. So yeah, if you want to defend Fox from either side, what you basically are doing is you're doing the reverse of taking it. When you take it, you move your recon up, and you have your ATGMs ready to kill opponent's fire support. When you're defending it, you want to have your recon in really solid positions that's hard for your opponent to deal with, so where you're not necessarily playing aggressive, and you want to have lots of ATGMs in various spots to make it hard for your opponent to deal with it. So, like for example, if your opponent has a pretty good Foxtrot presence, and you happen to have a vehicle ATGM like a Bradley, or some sort of long-range ATGM, or WZ550 is another good one as well, you can place that type of unit right here, and you'll see that you get a decent amount of zoning. And if you couple that with like an ATGM here or like here, you now create a crossfire that's pretty hard for your opponent to deal with because they have to think of multiple angles. You can put ATGMs here, here, and you try to play wider. You don't want to play narrow when you defend this area with ATGMs, and hopefully the idea is that your opponent will make some mistakes, lose some units, and then you can push it and retake. So that's Foxtrot. Last spot to talk about is Charlie, which is going to include Rectangle Forest right here, also called Square Forest, and T Forest right here because it looks like a T. So when you get into Charlie, when you're attacking Charlie, the entrances into Charlie are Rectangle Forest and T Forest right here. And again, like Delta, like Foxtrot, it's a lot of slow recon work and applying recon pressure to actually take this area. And we've talked a lot about that in Delta and Foxtrot, so I'm not really going to talk about that all that much again. You just got to be cautious about all these gaps and exactly how you move recon infantry up, and basically moving lots of short distances rather than big long distances to avoid mismicroing. The important part though are the ATGM spots. So from this side right here, there are these three ATGM spots which are pretty common, and I'll show this one first and why this can be somewhat deceiving. This right here is probably the most lazy spot to put your ATGM in because it's the fastest to unload. Or this spot right here. These are not the most optimal though, because as you can see, you're going to have a lot of problems actually having line of sight into this area. Because if your opponent is trying to go down this road right here and trying to push into Rectangle Forest, you will not be able to stop them. You're too far away, and even if you were closer, or if you want to do it even more extreme like this, you're looking through way too many forests, as you can see. So what you would instead want to do is you would instead want to move your ATGM farther to the left. Because if you move your ATGM farther to the left right here, then you're not really going to have all these line of sight problems that you had before, and you'll be able to hit more stuff, of course. This is another common spot as well, primarily for this area right here, but you're really not going to get much action over here. One of the best early spots for your ATGM is like this area, because you in essence have full line of sight on pretty much everything. And you will be able to just hit this road. If we, well, you can't quite hit this road here, but if they go slightly off of it, they die. Additionally, on top of all of that, you have good vision here as well. Um, Continuing from topside right here, if you can get your vehicles to where these AMX 10s are, you also just use a lot of basic line of sight tricks to make sure that your opponent has a hard time pushing you. So, what do I mean by that specifically? Well, if we put our tank all the way on the edge right here, then while yes, we do get full line of sight, if our opponent bot has an ATGM plane, which most likely they will because we're very close to the aerospawn, we have big problems and we're probably going to die, and we'll die to bigger tanks. However, if we are a little smart and we do something like this, right here, now we're in a position where we can shoot our opponent, but they can't shoot at us from these angles right here. You can do the exact same thing with this tank. You can also play this game for this road right here, where right now we have effectively full line of sight on where any fire support would be. But if we reverse a little bit like this, now we can shoot the infantry and they can't shoot at us. You typically don't do this particular move with tanks, but more with like autocannon vehicles or light tanks, like maybe a charioteer, maybe a BVP, or maybe a Scratchlet as well. That way we don't die to any sort of like Martyr 2s or scary things our opponent has over here. So you just do typical line of sight tricks. Once you have rectangle forest, though, you can start moving recon infantry up through these areas right here and play this very, very, very slow game. Not very exciting, but that's what you gotta do. From this side right... Oh, and sorry, one more thing I forgot. You can also put recon where these panzer guns are here initially as preparation to move up through this area right here. And this can be a pretty good spot to store your fire support as well. Like maybe you got pushed out, or you weren't able to quite push all the way in. And here, again, standard line of sight tricks that you can pull off. If we go all the way back like this, then we're pretty much invisible. And the second we go farther up right here, we gain visibility again, and it says our ability is a hard line of sight blocker. Now, if you want to truly gain Charlie control from topside, you need to control Rivertown right here, which is what I'm calling this. And ideally, if you can get like an ATGM and recon here, that's all you need. Because that ATGM makes it very hard for your opponent to use anything in this area right here. It's also pretty hard to deal with as well, just because of how far out it's going to be relative to their force composition. And your recon will be able to spot literally everything they call in. Like if you put it slightly more aggressive, you'll be able to see it. And you will also be able to see everything that they're having in this area as well, exactly when it's coming, and you'll see behind their smoke as well. So again, if you have a Kurnas, a GR7, a Q5D, whatever your favorite LGB plane is, and you can get recon to this area, they can't hide from you, or because you can see behind their smoke. So now let's talk from bottom side. From bottom side, you really want to make sure that you don't lose this area right here for all the reasons I just talked about. And usually what you try to do when you try to push through here is it's just like pushing through Delta. It's a lot of really slow recon work, moving your recon up with enough fire support behind, having good smoke, and making use of Arty to take these areas right here. And basically everything that I told you to defend against on the other side, you want to try that way of attacking. So we're the red 4 player here. You can come up through here and come like this to try to attack. You can take your tanks, which there may be smoke clouds, and push them this way, push them this way. And you just be very mindful of the ATGMs and move your recon into good spots to take out these ATGMs. Depending on the deck you're playing, you have to be very mindful of man pads. So like if you're playing against a deck with SAS, SASF, Iroquois, or LSTR, you have to be mindful of overusing helicopters. If you lose Rectangle Forest and T Forest pretty early on, a very like sort of go-to buy would be like buying a helicopter to retake it because maybe there's not AA nearby. But against certain decks, you have to be very cautious about that because if someone is pushing this area and they're smart, there will be LSTR, there will be Iroquois, there will be whatever the most annoying man elite infantry with Manpaz is. But yeah, pushing Charlie from the side is not too complicated. You want to just make sure that you don't you want to make sure that you basically have you're mindful of HHMs and you have a good recon usage. Another thing on Charlie, which I actually forgot to talk about on the other side, is this little area right here. You want to make sure that you don't lose this area as well if your opponent is playing really aggressive, because then they can really see everything. Maybe they can spot your fob, and if they're a piece of shit, they'll fob snipe you. But they can also see again behind your tanks, behind your smoke, sorry, and everything that you're bringing in. And the last thing I forgot to talk about in Charlie is making sure that you don't lose Charlie Town right here. If you lose Charlie Town, either because from Delta they pushed us straight into here, or after T-Force and Rectangle Force they were able to move quickly into Charlie Town, or they were able to do a push through this area, which we'll talk about in a second, and take Charlie Town, you're kind of just done. There's really not much you can do to come back from that. I think of all of the games I've played where I've taken Charlie Town, I've lost only one of them. And that was me just being stupid in other senses, not because I got outplayed, I think. So you have to be aware about losing Charlie Town, because if you do lose it, there will be 80 gems here, there will be recon here, and then there will be fire sport here, of course. So you're just kind of locked into too many angles to deal with, and you kind of can almost hit the surrender button at that point. You can try a little bit more if they overextended, but you're going to be in for a bad time. So from the bottom side, what you want to do is you want to always make sure that if these areas are in danger, you do have recon and 80 gems in here, and something here as well to spot the crossing and to make sure that you just can't walk in. But yeah, those are kind of all the areas individually, and the next thing to talk about would be global strategies, which I will get to after a quick break. So I'll see you in a second. Okay, I am back. So now what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some global strategy, and we'll start with the echo side or top side and talk about what to do from there. So the first thing to talk about is the most bread and butter basic push that you can do in this map. And in all honesty, probably the most bread and butter basic push in all of Wargame, which is the Alpha Town push, where from this side right here, the idea is we go up this road and we try to take Alpha Town. And there are kind of three, when you do this, it's very deck dependent. So there are kind of three types of ways you can play this. You can play this with a more tank focus, you can play this with a more mechanized focus, and with a more motorized focus. Now, as a precursor for everything, hang on, sorry, the screen is moving, which is going to drive me insane. As a precursor for everything, okay, good, it's not moving. So anyway, as a precursor for everything, if you want to play this less tank focused but more mechanized or more motorized focus, that doesn't necessarily mean you're playing a mech or moto deck. It usually is best not to do a pure Alpha Town opener, but instead to do some form of split opener, which I will briefly talk about when I talk about the mech and the moto stuff. So when explaining this, I'm going to put most of my effort into explaining how the tank focused push works. Okay, so the idea of the tank focused push is that you have some sort of tank group. Oh, that's too fat. You have some sort of tank group that's going to hang out like in this area right here, more or less, and you want to have a pretty decent number of points in tanks. The reason why is that because the map is so open, having lots of points in tanks, especially with bigger, heavier tanks like super heavies or close super heavies, will be very effective, because you can really control the engagement distances quite well. I think this is really the only map where doing a double super opener is not dubious in the slightest. So what I usually try to do with a tank focus setup is to try to shoot for anywhere from 240 to 340 points in tanks. So maybe that's 2 supers, or maybe you can go 2 M2 Wilks, for example, for your 240 points. And then you instead would play into more infantry focused types of stuff if you are on the lower end of that point threshold. And the idea is that your tanks will hang out here or they'll hang out here, and there'll be some sort of tank fight that happens with the opponent's tanks. That'll be like here or here usually. Um, and like last time, what we're going to do is we're going to assume that we win the opener first. And unlike Paddy Field, where the amount that you win the opener doesn't necessarily change what you may do in whatever strategy you pick, the amount that you win the opener in Mudfight really, really determines exactly what you do afterward. And whatever you decide, though, assuming you win, you must try to push your recon past where the starting positions. So like you would start like you'd start like here with your recon or like here. You want to try to push it past whatever you do. So with that in mind, the first case scenario is in our opener we have basically maximum victory, total victory, where we kill all of our opponent's tanks. What that basically means is that any remaining infantry our opponent has is going to crumble, and assuming that we're being good players and we're constantly reinforcing the town at that point will either be contested or will be ours. So what do we want to do? Well, we want to push past really far. Because our opponent has no tanks to contest us, it makes sense to push as aggressively as we possibly can. So because these are no longer in play, what that means is we push our recon up, as we've demonstrated here, but then we also want to push this direction here. So that means we can either push Charlietown, if we can get there fast enough. Against a better opponent, this will be a harder push to do right after the opener's lost, or sorry, right after the opener's won, because they might be reinforcing here preemptively, potentially, or they may see that the loss is coming. But if you can push Charlietown, you can almost end the game. Or what you can do is you can also try to push into here as well. Because if you can establish this and or this as your front line, then you have all the time in the world to play over here, and to basically keep on zoning your opponent out. So you stack it with ATGMs and recon teams, and then you start playing wide. You can maybe try to get units into this area, start moving ATGMs into here, and basically the whole entire point is that if you can do this type of strategy and apply a lot of pressure, and make it hard for them to buy accessory units, it kind of just like gets stuck in this little box right here, and it's very hard for them to move. And then you see V up and win. So if you kill all the tanks, then you play hyper aggressive, you can potentially end the game right away. Which is why if you lose the opener, it's important that you make sure to keep as many tanks alive as you possibly can. Because if you play against a hyper aggressive opponent, you could just lose the entire map. So the most likely scenario, or one of the two most likely scenarios, is rather than kill all the tanks, you're going to kill most of the tanks that your opponent has. So maybe they have a super heavy and some 100-point tank. Maybe you pop the super heavy, and the 100-point tank has already had a chance to run away, and there's more tanks coming in, or something like that. So in that scenario, it's going to be a little bit harder to push these towns, the Charlie towns right here, because they'll probably be more well defended, and it'll also be a little bit harder to push Rectangle Forest as well. So what do? Well, like before, if our recon started life here, we want to move up this way to make it harder for our opponent to get back in. Now, if our opponent probably is going to be able to contest this, so we may have a tiny little fight doing this, or they may not. Either way, what's going to be hard to do, it's going to be very hard to push from here into here, or all the way up like this. So we want to gain map control some other way, because if we don't do anything, and we just kind of sit there and focus purely on zoning, we're not being as aggressive as we possibly can, and we're giving our opponent a potential way to get back in. So there are two places, rather than these black arrows, to invest. Place number one is Alpha. What we can instead do is we can invest into Alpha and invest zoning, so we can put like some zoning stuff here, and then farther up as well. and try to play into this area. And a potential later plan that we can do is we can keep on moving through here, through here, through here, and we can build up a significant enough push that we can try to take Charlietown like this. Um, Against better opponents, it's a little bit harder to do this because you have less downtime to build this type of push up. And what that better opponent may do is they may meet you here, so you may have a fight right away. Sometimes not, but this is a potential idea that you can do. And this zoning, what it does is it's just going to lock down this road right here and make it hard for your opponent to actually do things and to push, which is important. So that's one idea you can have in alpha. This idea is a little bit slower because you have a lot more force to go through, and it's less aggressive. So if you're playing a slower deck or you're not quite comfortable yet playing hyper aggressive, then maybe this is what you want to do and you just focus really on zoning. The more aggressive approach that you can instead do is you can try to gain control of rectangle forests and T forests, except you would go along this road right here. The reason why this road is better to go on than this black road, potentially, is because if their tanks are retreating, their tanks are going to probably end up somewhere in this area right here, because they have to hide from your recon, and they have to hide from your other big tanks, or they may end up here. Now, if you do a good job and you keep your tank center to avoid any ATGMs from this town, from Charlietown right here, you can make it sure that the red 4 tanks have a harder time actually peeking out for you and causing damage. So what that means is that if you invest a lot of points into taking T Forest and maybe this part of Rectangle Forest or just this area in general, you might be able to take these for free because of how little points your opponent has invested here in the opener potentially. So what you could do is you don't have to maybe invest that much, but you get some recon and some fire support. Auto cannons would probably be great in the opener, and you rush through here and you take this. And then you can play through, and you can try to go like that as well, and really focus on trying to zone out your opponent. If you want to be extra aggressive, you could try to helo drop into Rivertown right here, but that's gonna be, in my opinion, that's a bit too aggressive for me, and it's very easy to shoot down in this to shoot that helo drop down in this case. But you have the less, so there are two options really. You have the less aggressive option here, and the more aggressive option here. Now, what you could try to do in the case of killing most tanks, and this is very, very situation dependent, is you could try to push this black arrow right here. You may end up, though, in a case where you're a little bit close to the arrow spawn, which adds a bit of risk, and you may not be able to spot the red 4 tanks in here, and they may have another one bot. It is certainly possible to do, but you have to be a bit careful. So that's scenario number 1. Sorry, scenario number 2 of winning the opener. Now, against a good opponent, the other very likely scenario is they keep most of their tanks alive, or sorry, they keep all their tanks alive and all their AA alive, and their recon mostly stays intact, but they lose the town fight right here. So they've effectively lost all or most of their infantry that's actually doing any sort of combat. Now, what do we do in this case? Well, our recon could be like here or here, so if we can, and the tanks are pushed back far enough, it's a good idea to try to advance. Now, again, you got to be cautious doing this because you don't want to lose your own recon, so you have to make sure you have plenty of fire support to be able to do this push right here. So we want to move our recon up, and then again, just focus purely on zoning. Get zoning stuff here, and you know, maybe in the middle, maybe here. Just focus on zoning. Maybe we look for other areas to advance into, so maybe we try for here, maybe we try for here. But in the event their opponent keeps their tanks alive and they're going to basically be repaired pretty quickly, these black line pushes are going to be a bit risky because they can just rotate into us. And for example, if they decide to put their tanks like right here, we won't be in a position to actually be able to do anything about that. And we might be able to get this T force right here, but it's going to be kind of loosely held. So in this case right here, we basically focus on buying some CVs to start a tick, to really force our opponent to delay their push or to basically eat a +1 tick, which is good for us. And we focus on basically making sure that they can't do anything because this is a map out zoning. So maybe a common strategy for them is maybe they want to come through here. So maybe we would invest something very early, just like the sneak I showed earlier with the Rima, um, into this area to intercept them. That's a potential idea that we can do. Um, or maybe they may move their tanks there. Now, if in the event that they actually do move their tanks into here, then this is the opportunity for us to actually make these black line pushes right here and to lock them out. You have to have recon to be able to spot that though, and you have to be pretty confident in playing aggressively and making sure that you have good smoke micro because you are moving pretty close toward the enemy air spawn. So those are the basic ideas. The map is really not that complicated. Now, if you want to play, if you are very tank centric and you have like a tank that's really good on the move, like the Leclerc or the Kimaru, for example, you may want to try chasing down the opponent's tanks because you might be able to get a pickup like that. You have to be very cautious though about doing that because if you maybe are a little too aggressive, you eat the AT gem plan, and rather than get a nice pickup, you instead traded, and then it becomes more stalemate-ish. So there's really not that much to talk about for this type of strategy here. It's pretty basic. Get good zoning, get good recon, try to counter the opponent's recon, and if you want to play aggressive, see if you can open up a new front. Now, what happens if you lose? Well, if you lose, you want to try to keep as many of your tanks alive as possible, because if you lose all of your tanks, then your opponent's going to do the exact same thing. They're going to come this way, right here. They're going to try to get alpha control with like zoning stuff here and here, and maybe they even want to try to make this type of attack. So it's important for you to not lose your tanks, so to make sure that this type of stuff can't happen. You also need to make sure that you have both anti-infantry capability and anti-vehicle capability in these areas if you lose the opener, to make sure that your opponent can't actually make these red line pushes. Because if you only have 80 gems here, for example, or like there's only an 80 gem here and there's like recon here or something like that, and your opponent makes this push right here, they can walk across open ground and kill your 80 gem, and then you have a very big problem. So you want to always make sure you have some sort of anti-infantry capability nearby. So what do we do? Well, the slower option is to invest into alpha. Now, from this side in particular, investing into alpha is a lot easier because the forested area, this area right here, is not forested. So going along this route right here is pretty quick. And the idea here is that we want to invest into alpha and take a forest fight, and we'll have stuff here as well. Because if we can control this area and basically surround the town to sort of crescent shape right here, then no matter how much stuff our opponent actually has in here, this also becomes very easy to retake because there can't possibly be tanks backing it up. So if we can surround the town, then we can take it. That's one option. It's generally favored with more mechanized types of units, but it's a totally valid option with tanks as well. Usually with tanks, I'd want to keep the bigger tanks nearby back here, maybe push them up again, to see if I can make aggressive plays on any sort of tanks right here. And then I may buy new smaller tanks for this area that'll be more cost effective. Or if I have my two big tanks like this, maybe I'll split one of them up. And I'll have only one in the center. Because I always want to maintain some sort of big tank presence in Delta. So that's one approach that we can do. Now, if we manage to keep our tanks alive, what we can instead do is we could try to play a more aggressive option where we just give this area up and give these areas up right here. And we want to instead open up a new front, which is going to be trying to push into T-Forest. This is a very good counterattack, where if we can basically rotate our tanks this way and buy new infantry as well, we can pop out through here and hit really hard potentially, because our opponent's tanks might be sidelined in this area. They may not be expecting it, and then they have to maybe do an awkward rotate potentially, where they may catch them off guard. That means ATGM planes. It means tank fights are not expecting, and if you're opening up a whole new front, you can most likely completely overwhelm this area for sure, and probably this area as well, and you have a pretty decent counterattack on your hand. Now, the downsides of doing this is that by giving up all this area in alpha, you will eventually have, and there will be zoning here most likely, eventually you will have to go back through here, and it will be kind of long and slow and annoying. Um, the other approach that you could potentially do later on, this is very, very risky though, is you could try to come down this road and attack alpha like that, assuming, of course, that you can remove these tanks from the field. It still will be a pain in the ass though, because this type of zoning also exists. So that is a downside of the type of strategy where you do basically give up alpha in the area in front of alpha, which is important. But you can maybe open up a new front, prevent your opponent from reinforcing, and then lock them into Charlie. That is the more aggressive option. Whatever you choose to do, though, it's important that you keep zoning maintained onto your opponent, because if you remove zoning, then they can attack new areas, and then you have big problems. The one thing that I should mention here is that in gaining control of alpha, or losing control of alpha, depending on what side you're on, the way that alpha is controlled specifically is by controlling the area in front of it. The reason why these zoning spots right here and here, or also right here, if you can get to like these areas to maybe hit this area, is because what you're effectively doing is you're basically denying the opponent this entirety of the road right here. And if they can't access this yellow part of the road, that means they can't attack Alpha Town. If they can't attack Alpha Town and they're focused so much on this zoning right here, that means that you can CV up on, that means that they can CV up on Alpha pretty easily. From your perspective, you basically have like zoning here, here, and maybe here if you can get up this far. So now they can't use this part of the yellow road, and they have to take the longer route in. So that's the idea. You want to maintain zoning no matter what you do. But yeah, you got two. So as far as like opening new fronts, you got two options: invest in alpha or invest for like a T forest, rectangle forest counterattack. And that's basically what it is from the tank perspective. You got to make sure to keep your tanks in delta, or nearby delta at least, so that you can quickly rotate if you need to, and that you always have the ability from the side to make this push right here, or push like this to run down tanks, and then you want to have smaller tanks in alpha. And you want to move your tank group, you want to move this tank group right here into aggressive positions no matter what you do, but just not too far off the center. In general, this whole entire yellow road is incredibly important, and basically a lot of what you do on this map as far as strategy goes devolves into figuring out how to zone out this road one way or the other. So moving your tanks off of it removes zoning, sort of, kinda. So that's from the tank-centric perspective. What about from the mech perspective? So if you're playing a mech deck in particular, you're going to have tanks that won't be very good in these open areas right here unless you get very close. So you kind of have two options. You can sort of play the tank style way, except you're going to want to, rather than take fights from back here, where the opponent has their, their big tanks like right here, what you may end up wanting to do is you may end up wanting to put smoke down, and instead, I'll result in yellow, maybe take tank fights farther up like that. And you can only get to this position really if your mechanized infantry wins this fight here quickly. Now, again, in the particular case of a mech deck, of like an actual mech deck, not a mech style deck, you will basically be playing retake on this town in the opener most likely. So what that means is that your push is going to have a lot of like fire support like here and here, as you walk in this way, and then a lot of smoke right here. The that's kind of the basic idea. You're gonna try to play more on the defensive side, the protecting side of your fire sport here to walk in, and then rely on your superior infantry before you want to make this tank transition to try take these fights right here. Um, that is with a pure mech deck. With a mech style deck, what makes more sense to do, and then you can also, and this also makes perfect sense with the mech deck, is you are also going to do a sort of split opener where you're going to invest, where you're going to go both for this town right here, but also you're going to invest into alpha right from the get-go. A lot of people who play very tank-centric are hesitant about investing into alpha from the get-go because that means there's less points for the town, so that means they can't play as aggressively here. If you decide to invest into units into alpha from the get-go, it's going to look something like you'll have maybe your tanks right here, not too many points though, most likely, and you'll have whatever infantry you have somewhere in this area. Your opponent's tanks will be like floating here or here, and what you want to do is you want to come around this way in the opener right away. And the idea is that when you take this tank fight here and you have, your fire support here and you fire support here, you're more or less banking on this alpha maneuver here to get to like these spots, just cause problems to force for your opponent. Maybe you have like Eric's, or you have spikes that you can do this with, or you just have recon and you get line of sight on the enemy's tanks for your planes. Alternatively, if you invest a big amount into alpha, you could also just put a bunch of fire support here from the get-go and have tanks here if you can play this wide, of course. And that's going to make it very hard for your opponents to use their tanks potentially because you have two angles. And that could make up for having cheaper tanks here. So in the case of if you're playing a mech deck in particular, it makes more sense to sort of do this alpha type split. It's not really a split, but it sort of kind of is. So yeah, really the focus is just on denying the typical tank locations that the low side player likes to use, and focusing less on winning the opener, but more on not losing the opener. Because if you don't lose the opener, and you already have this alpha push going, and in particular case if you are actually a mech deck, then you should win the town fight because you're upfitted infantry, and then once your alpha stuff gets into position, then you can potentially drive the tanks back and focus on zoning. In doing all this, though, you basically you'll basically devolve into those strategies from earlier, but rather than try this type of push, which we'll talk about later with your mech deck, you will probably just focus more on this area. Now, if you play mech in particular, one of the unique things that mech can do, which is truly terrible, horrible to play against, is you have so many 5-pointers that you can deplete zoning material of your opponents. If you have a ton of reservists and like Stu Trooper and 5-pointers and 5-pointers on top of 5-pointers on top of 5-pointers, it makes it very hard for your opponent to actually kill them all without running out of ammo with their ATGMs. So you can basically build that type of push up over time and slowly drain their ATGMs, which means that they have to take points away from spending on more infantry, more tanks, because they have to resupply the ATGMs to kill more cheap stuff, which removes their zoning unless you make more aggressive plays with your tanks. But that's kind of the modification that I would personally make if I was playing a more mech deck or a mech deck or a mech style deck. I'd probably want to go a bit more into alpha. And then the last is my favorite, which is Moto. Now, the disclaimer here right away is that if you are playing a pure Moto deck, it is not a good idea on this map to just push like this into alpha. And there are a number of reasons why. The first reason why is that solo fronting here as Moto, you're 9 times out of 10 going to be opening directly into the opponent's opener, and your zoning potential might be a little bit iffy from the get-go, and just with how the tank fighting is going to work. So
you have that going against you. That's the first thing. The second thing also is that if you're playing Moto, like Moto in particular, you want to just, by the philosophy of your deck, be opening up as many fronts as you possibly can maintain. Um, because that's where you're most cost effective. So you really just have cost effective issues here if you try to solo front this. Um, that being said, it can be done. And what you really want to do in the opener, because I you will almost always win the opener here. You really want to be focusing very heavy early on into zoning and getting like these important zoning spots here, here, um, to drive those tanks back, and then and then you also want helicopters as well, to maybe to kill the AA, and to cause other sorts of cheesing nonsense, and a big focus on planes too. Um, if you do decide to solo from this as a moto deck in particular, what you want to do almost immediately is start opening up new fronts. Open up a new front here. Open up a new front here, because that means your opponent isn't investing into this one area where they will eventually win against you. If you are playing a moto style deck, though, um, well, you'll basically end up doing a split opener. If you're playing a moto style deck. But if you're playing a moto style deck and you want to solo this, you can do in essence the exact same thing except invest less points into tanks and more points into infantry to kind of do what the mech player does with this alpha play here and having more zoning. Except if you're playing moto style, you can probably just helo drop here and accelerate the whole entire process. Um, so it's kind of similar to how the mech is going to work, except you're going to be focusing a lot more on zoning and opening new fronts as quick as possible. So that's the Alpha Town push, from mech moto and for the tank perspective. Next thing to talk about would be the T-Forest push, which is going to be this guy right here, and this guy right here. It's called the T-Forest and Rectangular Forest and Rectangle Forest push. Sometimes you may hear the people who want to be quirky say this is the alternate opener. I prefer to call it the T-Forest Rectangle Forest push just because it's more descriptive. So we'll start with the tank-centric perspective on this. Because you will not necessarily be engaging in a head-on tank fight right away, you don't need as many points in tanks. So you'll need to do this. Let me redraw this in blue. You'll need probably 200 to 300 points in tanks. I'd probably go for the lower end here because having infantry and zoning materials is going to be much more important than actually just getting a whole bunch of really, really big tanks. So how does this work on tanks? Well, we focus on recon and zoning because we're in essence we're given access to this whole entire Charlie area in the opener, which means that if we get really aggressive recon positions, really aggressive ATGM positions, make life hard for our opponent. So when we do this opener, the idea is that we're going to open into both T-Forest right here and into Rectangle Forest. T-Forest because it's nice because T-Forest gives us the opportunity to go this way or just straight down this road. And maybe even into a river town like that. And then Rectangle Forest, because if we can make this an established front of, a blue front right here, then it's hard for our opponent to use like tanks in this area. Because what if there are ATGMs in here? What if there are Eric's teams, for example, or any sort of launcher with 875 range or recoilless rifles? There's tons of options, or autocannon shots to the side. That's the idea behind this type of push, and we want to move our recon up. Sorry, not that one. We want to basically play aggressive with our recon, like get up to here. If we can get to here, that's great, and then 80 gems like right behind it. That's the idea. Now, what will our opponent actually do in this case? Well, they're going to probably rotate into us like this, buy more units to go like that, and they may focus a bit on zoning here if they can get this by. Now, our idea is that if we can have this whole blue front here, we want to basically eliminate their opponent's ability to use this stretch of road right here for free. And the idea is that if we eliminate that, then Alpha Town is no longer reinforced, and then post-opener it'll be quite easy to take back. That's the idea. So in doing this, in a great scenario, what could happen is, our opponent's tanks may not rotate into us, but if they've overcommitted, they may be somewhere in this area right here, which means we have it's really easy for us to take Charlie, and because we're in alpha, we can really focus very heavy on this right hand side right here. That is the first thing that can happen. Probably won't happen against a more experienced opponent. We'll get to why in just a second, but it certainly is possible. The other thing that will most likely happen is a tank fight will have this sort of tank fight right here, which are basically forcing our opponent's tank into an awkward position into potential zoning. So if we have like ATGMs like here or here as well, and we take our tank fight like this, it's like something like this vaguely. The positions aren't exact, it's just rough ideas. Our opponent has a lot of angles to deal with. They have this angle, these angles, and the tanks right here. So it makes it very hard for our opponent to actually push and to do things, which is good for us. So what we can also do in all this is, while this tank fight is happening here, if we are happy with our zoning potential, we can start to invest into alpha itself pretty early on, with the idea being that if we can get to this type of thing where we surround the town, we deny these areas, and we have like stuff here and here, well, all we gotta do is just drive in and take it, maybe have a little bit of arty or some fire sport, and this shouldn't be a problem. Because if there's only one ATGM, we can deal with that. But if there's one ATGM in tanks, that's a lot harder to deal with. And we know that during this push, our opponent's tanks will be occupied in this region right here, and we'll have a hard time multitasking. That's the idea. Now, the danger in doing this is if we lose. If we lose, what basically happens in the opener is our opponent has this. Our opponent will now have this, which was there to begin with. We will most likely be able to maintain control of T Forest right here, but now we're just basically on the back foot, which is why a lot of people when doing this opener would like to invest into alpha pretty soon after the opener is concluded. That way you have some sort of insurance policy on how to get back in. And again, you want to keep you really want to keep those tanks alive if you lose the opener, because if you just totally lose them, your opponent will now completely have the initiative as opposed to being able to contest the initiative. The great thing about the rectangle forest and the T forest push is that if your opponent does the most common thing and opens just for Alpha Town, which we'll talk about when we get to them, you get to grab the initiative right away from them, and you put them on the back foot right away. Your force composition is specifically tuned for this type of push. Theirs is not, so they're going to be in a more awkward position than you will be in, which is good. So yeah, you better hope that you'll probably win the opener here, but if you lose the opener, you really want to keep those tanks alive, and hopefully have that insurance policy going for you. If you don't, you're in for a very slow game where you basically have to invest into alpha and have to invest into zoning, and you're going to be in the back foot for a while. So that's kind of from the tank-centric perspective here. What about from the mech perspective? I do not think if you're playing a mech deck, a mech deck in particular, a mech style deck is a little bit different, but if you're playing a mech deck in particular, I do not think this is a good opener to do. And the reason why is that with the opponent's tanks right here and yours in this area, the engagement distances will be on the longer side. And your tanks are going to be at a disadvantage at that point, which can be an issue. Additionally, mech tends to be pretty vulnerable to helicopters and to planes, and you're already pretty close to the air spawn, so that also has something going against you as well. And finally, this opener is a lot less effective if you only have mechanized units, because your opponent can rotate pretty quickly. a good opponent on red 4 side will try to see, oh, you're doing the alternate opener or the T forest rectangle opener, whatever you want to call it, and their tanks won't end up here. They'll end up here. They'll have a lot of time, and they can play into this area much faster. Um, and they can and then what they'll probably do is they'll probably have stuff here right away, and you're going to be in much more of a grind, but you don't have the type of forest presence in alpha that you would otherwise have. So I don't think this is a good idea for a pure mech deck. Now with a mech style deck, you'll have some wheeled units, so you can secure some sort of early ground where you can put AT gems and zoning material, but it will work much better for you um, in the case of a mech deck. In the case of mech style deck. So yeah, in short, if you're playing a mech deck, this is pretty risky to do because there's no forest where you'll be most cost effective, where you'll dominate, and you're vulnerable to planes. Um, if you're playing a mech style deck, then you can actually pull this off much more effectively. Um, in all honesty, though, if you're playing a mech deck and you want to push this area, the best thing for you to do is just to do some sort of split opener, which we'll talk about later, where you split Alpha Town push and then rectangle T Forest push. And the last thing is Moto. How to play this with a more motorized setup. Um, Again, if you're playing a pure Moto deck, you should most likely be doing split openers on this map, where it would look like pushing this direction like this. You go here most likely. Oops. And you push like this. That's how it typically works as playing a pure Moto deck. If you're playing a Moto style deck, though, you will have tanks that can contest. So you'll invest at lower number of points in tanks. And because you're playing a Moto style, you can get to these areas a lot faster. And you have a much better zoning network setup for Charlie. And what you can also probably do if you're playing a Moto style deck, you might be able to get to River Town very, very early on. And basically, you try to make the front line look something like this right here from the get-go. And then you push, and then basically your main push is going to be through here. That's the idea, and you'll be relying on, like you're playing Moto, your really good infantry, or if you're playing Moto style, motorized infantry to get good positions, plus whatever tanks you have supporting you. So yeah, this works. This type of solo lane push works if you're playing a pure Moto, but split openers, in my opinion, are slightly better if you're playing just a actual Moto deck. So really what you're focusing on is just focusing on zoning, aggressive recon placements. If you can get the River Town, that's great. If not, no worries. And then later on, you'll retake Alpha Town. And if you're playing a Moto deck, you most likely will be investing pretty heavy into Alpha early on, which is not going to be the case if you're playing a more tank-centric deck. And the reason why is that you have to be playing fast. You have to be opening up lots of new fronts pretty early on. So it makes sense to start building this front right here as early as possible. And those are the two major pushes that you can do from this side. So now it makes sense to start talking about the fun stuff, which is split openers. The first split opener that you can do is the Alpha plus Alpha Town one, which I kind of talked about. It's a slower opener, and your goal necessarily isn't to win the opener, but your goal is necessarily to just not lose. The idea is you want to kind of maintain control of these towns right here, have like zoning, either like here or here, your call, and you just focus on getting these areas right here and surrounding your opponent's tanks so they can't really get into good positions. So with your tanks, you don't have to invest into as heavy tanks when doing this. You can go on lighter on the tank side. And you basically can put your tanks like here or here, and your opponent may have trouble pushing from this direction into you because maybe you have the ability to get like these types of angles on your opponent. Maybe not all at once, but it's a certain possibility that you can do this. So you can do this type of thing with a tank-centric deck and with Moto or mech-centric decks. Um, this type of push works really well if you can actually get a heal drop to pull it off first, because rather than having to work like clear every single bush here, which can be annoying because you don't know what your opponent actually has, if you can instead just get the heal drop off, you can greatly speed everything up. Because if you heal drop, if you heal drop here, and you can secure this area right from the get-go, that means that anything in this yellow area is just free real estate, and you don't have to clear it. So you can basically make this alpha push go a lot faster. So this works well with mech decks, mech style decks. Like if you have a Martyr 2 CV90, it works great for that. If you play Scandi, you can also do this with Scandi because you're the king of the forest. So this is one type of push you can do, and you really just focus on not losing in the opener, and you play later on in the game. So your forest compositions on this side I've kind of already explained, and for Delta you really just focus on zoning. And you don't really try to move your infantry up aggressively into these further town blocks right here until you have this alpha front line, this alpha like zone control set up, and then you can go ahead and do that because it puts the opponent's tanks in an awkward position and gives you time to buy bigger tanks if you have that, or artillery, planes, more zoning, whatever. So that's kind of the first type of push, split that you can do. Now, the most common split that you can do is the one that I alluded to earlier, which is the Alpha Towns Rectangle T-Forest split. This works best with Moto style decks or motorized decks, just pure motorized decks. And the reason why is that if you're playing a pure moto deck specifically, everything you have is going to be so cheap and cost effective and fast that you're almost guaranteed to win the opener. So if you're playing a pure moto deck, you can play aggressive here and into this areas, and then maybe if you're really aggressive, get to here as well. Because if you're playing pure moto, you'll really have good smoke micro to make sure that your opponent has a hard time actually taking this town. And you'll have things like Buffaloes, Norlands Jaeger, ATGMs really early on in the town, Legion 90. If you're playing a deck like Commonwealth Moto, Highlanders, or Tank Shashao, whatever. And you can play pretty aggressive here if you're playing a pure moto style deck. So if you're playing a pure moto deck. And the whole idea is that by going into both of these fronts right here, so let me remove this. The idea is that if your opponent's tanks were right here, like in this area, they're now in a very awkward position. And they're going to be in an awkward position from the openers right away. Because most people with their recon helicopter, so the recon helicopter right here, the cool thing is they will spot this first before they spot this right here. So they won't necessarily rotate their tanks off the road, which means that your rectangle forest push right here and your T forest push right here tend to be almost completely uncontested. Now, when doing this push specifically as a Moto style deck or a Moto deck, you want to have AA both on this lane right here and this lane right here, because a cool thing is that their recon helicopter won't be able to see the AA until right here when it gets out, and then they're going to die. So it makes it very hard for your opponent to actually use a recon helicopter aggressively like most people want to do in the opener, because they just don't have anywhere to go in Delta other than backwards. So the idea is that in a moto deck, you can when the opener, play aggressive basically everywhere, and then really focus on zoning. Zoning is incredibly important. And then on top of all this, you'll draw the tanks into an awkward position. You can get side shots on them. Good things with planes happen, and then hopefully the game is over in 10-15 minutes because you've killed so much stuff. And if you can also focus on post opener trying to build a push into here like that, or if you kill all the tanks, just you go right away really quickly as a moto deck. As a moto style deck, it's going to be a little bit different because your infantry won't get those nice upfighting bonuses, And because they won't have those nice upfighting bonuses, what that means is you can't play as aggressively in Alpha Town, but you will be able to play pretty aggressively in the T Forest and the Rectangle Forest area. So what you're going to try to do is you're going to focus, like before, on not losing the opener in Alpha Town, because you don't want to have to play retake here. You want to be in a spot where you get an advantageous spot, maybe kill some transports before they get in, but really focus on putting those tanks in an awkward position, and you have your like one tank or your two tanks here that you can really come like this and come like this as well. To make sure that those tanks just die and get forced either into the graveyard or forced that way, in which case you can make even more progress in Charlie going like this. And then get this healer drop off. So that's the idea of how a Moto style deck would play this and a Moto deck would play this. Basically, you focus on aggressive zoning, and putting the red 4 tanks in this case in a very awkward position. Now, the last type of split you can do is a little bit different. I have seen one other person do this type of split before, and that's Putin, who taught me how to do this one, which I think is a cool idea, which is the Delta Alpha Town split. The idea here is as follows. Your main tank group will be going down this road right here, hooking a left, and then coming up through here. And then what you do is you play this area like this with your main tank. So I'll put double T for big tanks. Simultaneously, what you do is you send a smaller force, ideally with one motorized unit, like in the case of USSR, a BTR-90, or DGC like Corps Mariner, something like that, into this area to take here. And you want to take this town, and you want to accept that whatever unit you put here is going to die, and you don't want to necessarily try to win the opener here right away. You'll also have one smaller tank here, like a dirt cheap medium, or a cheap medium in general, and the idea here is that you have these two tank groups, one here, and you can play like this, or like this as well. And this can put the red 4 tanks in an awkward position, especially if you have like this big tank group is like a super heavy or double OBR 1989 or super heavy and some other thing. This is a very tank centric type of play, where maybe you'll have almost 300 points of tanks here, and then another tank right here as well, or like a BMPT if you know you're playing as Moto, for example. And again, the idea is to force your opponent to take these very awkward tank engagements, where they have to kind of pick and choose what they're going up against, and they may get side shot. The danger in this is that you may end up losing Alpha Town, potentially, because you're not going to have that much stuff there because you are investing a lot of points in tanks. But if you play it correctly, it can be kind of hard for your opponent to actually make a lot of aggressive plays they would otherwise like to be making. It has some great advantages, though. Because your big tanks start life right here in this area, if you can push the red 4 tanks back this way or back this way, it means that you don't have to do any rotating at all, and you can do very quick attack into T-Force with some new units. So now you can have this area in the event that you win the opener, and you'll still be contesting Alpha Town and most likely win it soon, and then later on you can try to go for this. That is one really, really big advantage that this has. If you lose, you basically go back to one of the post Alpha Town opener ideas, and you go from there. The more aggressive play is always an option if you lose the opener, because of just where your tanks are situated. But yeah. Now, one of the things that people will always do in this opener is they will neuron activate planes. And the reason why the neuron activate planes is because most people don't put their tanks here in the first place, so they think, oh, it's far away from AA. So when you play with your tanks here, you have to have a decent amount of AA in this, because you will be playing this in this more open area. You have to have a decent amount of AA, and you need to have really good smoke micro, because people will go for planes really early on. The idea is that with your dirt cheap medium right here, if they send their plane, you know, uh, this way like that to kill this, they'd use that with your lot of AA. You're going to maybe trade the plane for the tank, which is good. And then if they make the decision to go this way, then you most certainly will kill the plane if you're smoke microing correctly. So yeah, that's kind of what you can do on the bottom side if you're not going to pure cheese someone. If you're going to pure cheese someone, you can do like stupid things of send helicopters on the side like that from the get-go, but I'm not going to talk about that. Um, and now, after a quick break, we're going to switch over to the bottom side. Okay, I'm back. And now that I'm back, we can talk about global strategy of the bottom side of Mudfight. So, like the top side, we will start off with talking about the pure Alpha Town push. It's going to pretty much be almost identical to topside. You're gonna go down this road right here. You're gonna try to push this town. They'll probably be going down like this, and you'll meet head on. Um, and like topside, you're gonna shoot for about 240 to 340 points in tanks. You have recon here or recon here, one of these types of spots. Um, it's not gonna be anything really too surprising. Um, you're gonna like before on the other side, you're gonna want to get some good zoning pretty early on, good recon presence pretty early on. Um, and you're also gonna want to like try to push your recon into aggressive spots carefully, of course. It's all kind the opener itself and the side game plan itself is gonna be pretty much identical to the red force side in this case, except with the script flipped. Um, so what do we do? So let's just say we win the opener. We eliminate um, in some way, and how do we go about doing that? Well, like the other side, it depends on how hard we win the opener. And like the other side again, there are three cases. The first case is that um, in our opener, we are able to kill all of the enemy tanks. So what do we do at this point? Well, the natural thing to do is to push Delta Town. But before doing that, what we gotta do, push our recon up, push our recon up. We always do this depending on if we win the opener by killing tanks. And then we can basically build some forces here, and get our tanks moving this way. If we're able to play hyper aggressive and push into Delta Town when there are no tanks on the field, and we are the only one with fire support, then if we can control Delta Town right here, we basically have won the game at this point. There's really not much we can do. Because we're going to look something like our opponent can do. It's going to look something like this right here. And we have the option of reinforcing Alpha or even being more aggressive into Foxtrot, and basically controlling the entire map. So what do we want? We want more ATGMs to help facilitate zoning. We want more recon. We want to move that recon up, move the ATGMs into aggressive positions. And also, if we can spare the points, if depending on how aggressive we're playing, we want to focus a bit on zoning as well. So, I forgot to say this on the other side, so I'll say it here, and you can look at it retroactively, I guess. But whenever we win the opener, whenever we win the Alpha Town push, you always want to fill the town with an ATGM. You always want at least one. That applies for this side, and it applies for the other side as well. Now, the added benefit of playing on this side of the map is that your zoning is extra effective, as we talked about earlier. You can move stuff here and here, and you reach quite a bit farther than you otherwise would. Additionally, when you win the opener here, what you should do is you should take your fighting infantry, like your shocks and stuff like that, and move them out along this path right here into this area to prevent your opponent from reaching Alpha painlessly. Because if they can just bypass you and get to here, then you're gonna have issues. But if they run into one of these blue dots along the way, which will be unexpected, then you can do a lot of damage potentially. So playing aggressive into Alpha is pretty important. The same thing works for the other side as well, but it's not quite as effective, but it's still something that you should do. So that's kind of what happens in the event that you kill all the tanks. Once again, move the recon up, buy ATGMs, focus on zoning, and try to attack Delta Town. If you're a little bit hesitant about attacking Delta Town right away, this is objectively the best play you can make because your tanks are right here. You can try to really focus instead on zoning in Delta and attacking in Delta Town later. And then with your extra points, you can maybe try to open up a new front. Sorry, oops, shit. Um, you can try to open up a new front in Foxtrot instead to make it so that your opponent has an even harder time actually attacking and getting back into alpha. And you may or may not actually have a successful Foxtrot attack, but while this is happening, you have the time to buy CVs and get a nice tick going while your opponent is going to be pressed to actually do that and have few points to do it in the first place. Now, the second case is you kill most tanks. If you kill most tanks, you can't make as aggressive tank plays as you otherwise would be able to. In the case in case of moving your tanks up and then really applying a lot of pressure into Delta. So what you'll instead do is you'll instead take your recon, try to move it up as much as you can with the support of your tanks, of course. Buy ATGMs and focus on zoning. So you'll put them in these spots like right here or the spot right here, and the town as well, of course. And if you can even get an ATGM up even farther into the forest, that's also really good. And then maybe you can also consider opening up a new front. This is a little bit more of a maybe though, because it's not going to be quite as effective, but it still can be pretty good if you have the cheap enough things to do it and really independent units like a Martyr. If you have a Martyr 2 in your deck, for example, or a CV90 in your deck, then you have then the ability for you to open up new fronts is a lot higher because those IFVs are hilariously good at killing like everything. But if you're playing a deck like USSR, if you're playing a deck like USSR, then you're probably not going to be able to open up a new front necessarily. Going to want to focus on like building up. The Mar 2 example also applies if you're playing like a Moto deck or a mechanized deck, where it's going to be easier to open up new fronts just because of how quick, in the case of Moto, how quick your units are and cost effective and low point engagements they are. In the case of mech, just how cost effective your units are just in general, but your front opening up will be a little bit slower. Now, in the more likely case of you're going to kill... Oh, sorry, before I talk about the next case, you also want to start investing into alpha as well, because a big thing that your opponent could potentially do is they could really try to make this move into here, like this. And it's important for you to make sure that this doesn't happen, that you maintain alpha control because of how strong your zoning is. So investing a little bit into alpha is a good idea. And then also investing into these areas right here as well to make sure that your opponent can't actually come all the way through here is another good thing. Basically, you focus on zoning. Now, next thing to happen is you win the opener and your opponent is able to keep all their tanks safe. And what basically happens is you are going to engage in very similar protocols. So our recon's like right here, right here. We move it up if we can, like before. We have to be a lot faster on the timing though, because our opponent could come in with their tanks if they get repaired, or more tanks if they have them. We buy ATGMs, and if we move them into aggressive positions. But again, we have to be very, very, very careful doing this. And then we absolutely must invest in alpha, and just in general solidify other areas. So basically, you don't really have the option of opening up new fronts in this case because you probably can't really afford the points. So you should instead focus on zoning and maintaining a +1 tick if you can. This map is very easy to hold a +1 tick for a long time if you have your zoning down. So if you can start that process early while focusing on zoning, you can put your opponent in a very awkward position where you can accumulate like 200 points. And on this map, 200 points is a lot of points to get. So that's what happens if you win the opener from the sort of tank-centric point of view with the Alpha Town push. What about happens if we lose it? Well, we want to basically keep our tanks alive as much as possible to avoid everything prior that we talked about happening. Um, and what can we do? Well, we really want to keep this recon alive as well, and these ATGMs alive as well, so that we don't have to rebuy them, and that we don't have to basically make very slow progress to put them back into good positions. So, how do we move? What do we do? Well, we can invest into alpha if we want to be a little bit slower. The slower approaches basically come through here. Maybe you basically come like this a little bit. You have to be careful though, because the ATGM range can hit you potentially if you're not careful. And then the idea is, we invest in alpha, we invest in this area right here, we try to surround it, put like zoning right here, and then deny the opponent the ability to actually reinforce the town, then take the town. This actually works a lot better from this side than the other side if, and this is a big if, you can get into alpha fast enough. Because if you can get into alpha fast enough and have tanks there fast enough, the zoning is much, much stronger, and you can very easily deal with an opponent who's playing a little too passive or is being lazy with really solid ATGM placement. Um, so that's a big if, but if you can pull it off, it works well. That's a slower way. The faster way, which is more aggressive, is we can invest into Foxtrot. Now, if we want to invest into Foxtrot when doing this, we have to have ATGMs here, and an ATGM here at the minimum, and then also probably an ATGM right here. And the idea is that we're going to go like this, apply pressure this way, and this is something that our opponent has to respond to. Because if they don't respond to it and we control this area and this area right here, now we can sneak in like that into their spawn. We can go like this, and we can come through this town as well. And we can attack the spawn right away. So they're forced to either move into our ATGMs or to start rotating. And this is why it's really important to keep your tanks alive, because this attack works a lot better if you don't have to rebuy 200 points of tanks. But if you have ATGMs and infantry here so that your opponent can't push, and then you attack Foxtrot, it works a lot better. So really, really make sure to keep those tanks alive so that you can open up a new front elsewhere. What you should avoid, though, in almost all cases, you don't want to follow up to try to open up your new front into Delta Town like this, post-opener. The reason why is that your opponent will still have their tanks like in this area, most likely if they're playing well, and you've lost a lot of infantry, if not all of your infantry, and your tanks were damaged and they need to be repaired. And here you're pushing into a very, very big town where ATGMs can be anywhere. There can be man pads and a lot of really high quality infantry in there as well. Now, if you have enough cheap fire support, this is certainly an option that you can do, but you have to keep in mind that you basically are building an opener from scratch. Delta Town in general is very, very difficult to take in the opener. And then really difficult to take post-opener. So it's a risky play. You have to keep that in mind. But yeah, that's kind of how this would work from the more tank-centric perspective. The next thing is, how do we talk about the Alpha Town push if we're playing mech? Well, if we're playing mech, we also, like before, we really want to make sure to be investing into Alpha as well. Simply because Alpha and these more close quarter distances where our infantry can really shine is where our deck will really shine. And our tanks, which are smaller, so I'll use not that. I'll use blue. So our tanks, which are small, use lowercase t's. We'll probably have a hard time taking on these bigger tanks right here. So maybe instead we have our tanks more offside a little bit like this. And we really try to focus on instead surrounding Alpha as such, with maybe a lot of zoning, and then really trying to rely on good smoke micro to make it so that our opponent is going to have a hard time actually accessing this town with their fire support. Because if we do this, and then if we smoke like this, and they also put smoke right here, then if you're playing mech, because you have the upvet, that is a fight you should be able to win. So yeah, you're going to focus basically. This is the idea of what you want to do. Like before, if you want to take this tank fight, you want to focus more on not losing the opener and instead focusing on just building up your mechanized tank and then just mechanized tank blob and just like shoving it for like 4 2-1s forward or whatever while you have cost-effective infantry everywhere. Um, before you take that fight. You don't want to take that fight too early because then you have to come back from a not so hot position. So yeah, basically you want to focus on not losing investing into alpha. I'm sorry, you want to focus on not losing the opener and basically investing into alpha to surround everything and relying on your superior infantry to actually win this fight. Um, and then like before with the tanks, because you're playing mech and everything's very cost effective, you really want to focus on zoning as well. Zoning is really, really important here. Because if these red 4 tanks decide to chase you down, then you're going to be out 2-1s on a more open map, which can be problematic. However, if you have early zoning invested like here, here, and here, then that's a lot harder for those red 4 tanks to actually chase you down, and you can keep your 2-1s alive a lot longer. So before you push, really focus on zoning and really focus on smoking out the enemy fire support to really let your infantry shine. And assuming you win this, then it's assuming whether or not you win or lose this, it basically devolves into everything that I talked about earlier with the other Alpha Town push with tanks focus. Now the last thing to talk about is Alpha Town push with a moto focus. And this is actually interesting because it's really one of the first asymmetries of this map. It's not good, but it's an asymmetry by necessity in essence. Um, on the previous side right here, if we try to moto push just straight down here, if we're playing a pure moto deck, what's going to happen is we're going to run into problems of we've confronted the enemy's opener head on, and there's only one front. And as a result, they have only one thing to focus on, and they will most likely be able to win that fight in the long term. From this side, though, it's a little bit different. Because when you come through here as a moto player, you're also going to have a healer drops here and healer drops here. But this side, for solo Alpha Town openers, is much better because the zoning here is so much better than the other side. It's so much easier to get recon units and AT gems into the critical zoning positions, and recon right here as well, so that you can both maintain control of this town and then very early on have AT gems in annoying spots and recon in annoying spots as well. So unlike the case of the other side, this solo push with the moto deck actually does work. Now, all of that being said, it's not the strongest way to play this as a moto deck. The stronger way is to really focus on, the strongest way is really to focus on split pushes. But this isn't a lot. But from this side, it is a lot more effective to do a solo front moto push in the opener than it is on the other side, and just in general post opener as well, just because of how effective the zoning actually is. So, yeah. Really want to focus on cheesing into alpha basically right here to get around, and really focus on quick zoning. Because if you can zone quickly, you force the enemy tanks into awkward positions, which lets you win that town fight a lot better, and maybe you'll pick up a tank or two. And like before on the other side, you really, 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 really want to open up a new front as soon as possible when doing this. Because if you don't, well, you're going to basically lose out in the long run. Now, if you're playing a Moto style deck, it's a little bit different because you'll be investing a bit more into tanks, and you won't necessarily have as much zoning stuff here on this right-hand side. You'll still have some zoning stuff here, of course, but not as much. So, the Moto style and the Moto deck comparison for this type of push right down the down the main road right here is not as different as it is on the other side. Okay, so that's done. Now we can talk about the more exciting other ways to push. And the first type of push is the Delta Town push. The timings in the opener, if you do this push, really, really do not favor you. At all, in fact. Because your opponent will get to Delta Town first. There is nothing you can do about it. Well, there's nothing you can do about it on the ground, at least. You can use helicopters to equalize the situation, but there's nothing you can do on the ground. So post-opener pushing it really doesn't help you a lot because there'll be a lot of AT gems there and a lot of infantry in there. So if you want to, so this type of push works best in the opener or when your opponent has very few units on the field, or you know that there's not that much there due to good recon placement, like getting a recon right here, for example. So how does this work? Well, in the particular case of the opener, there are two roads you can go down. Here, or you can come here. The timings are similar enough that I'd rather take this path right here, simply because it disguises my path. It's a little bit more of like disguisey, and I'm not as vulnerable to planes. Because if I take this path right here, and someone is going to try and cheese with an SU-25T in the opener, for example, or a Ninja P7 or a Tiger and Peace Rhine, then I'm going to really be showing side and I'm going to be having problems. I don't have those same types of problems here. So the timings are similar enough that I'd rather take this path right here because I don't run into plane issues. Now, how do you actually push this? Well, you basically need a lot of fire support to knock everything out in this town early on, and a lot of infantry. There's a very good chance that you will lose in the KD in the opener, but you're really going to be relying on having this Delta Town front right here to equalize this later on in the game. So don't obsess over the KD. Just focus on getting a good position and applying good zoning, and then you can worry about like getting your tanks back and what have you, and your fire support back. You also really need to be willing to lose a lot of infantry in this push, because you will have a lot of time visible to ATGMs, and you have no idea where the ATGM will be. Your opponent might put they might be lazy, and they might put their ATGM here, or in the opener they might put their ATGM here. And their ATGM can also move around pretty quickly as well. So you will be losing units in the opener before they can actually do stuff, unless you get incredibly lucky. So having like some smoke here, for example, could be a good idea, because you might if the opponent sees you, they're going to instead take this road with their tanks right here. So you're going to deny for a split second the opponent's tank's ability to shoot at your stuff coming in. And then by cutting off the town like this, right here, you know there's only a very small finite number of places those ATGMs can actually be. Now, one thing you can do if you have good helicopters in your deck is you can open with a lot of helicopters here to really try to secure this. And again, you have to be willing to lose units when doing this. But you have to also get units in. So like, if I'm playing, for example, a deck with MI-17s, and I have like a K-29 or an MI-17 CV, then I'm going to be sending a lot of helicopters there and a recon helicopter as well, just to see if I can prevent the red 4 units driving down this road to not get in, to deny them entry. Because if that happens, then this push works a ton better, and it's a lot stronger because you're not going to be losing as many units. When you do this push as well, you need to have ATGMs here and an ATGM here as well. And you can buy infantry for this spot later on, but you should have units here. That way your opponent can't do some sort of flanking maneuver into you like this. So the whole idea about this opener is to get zoning into zoning material into Delta Town pretty early on. Because if you can get like an ATGM here, you have massive, massive, massive reach. Or an ATGM here, you also get massive, massive reach as well. And you deny a lot of the map with this push. So the idea is to get zoning here early on. So maybe even opening with an ATGM here is a good idea, or first buying an ATGM if you think you're going to win the opener. Now, if you win the opener, immediately put zoning in. And what you want to be doing is one of two things or two things simultaneously. The first thing is you want to be investing in a Foxtrot. The great thing about... let me just remove some of the clutter here. So the great thing about... actually, I'll also remove all the clutter. Okay, take 3. The great thing about having Delta Town like this is you can attack Foxtrot a lot easier because you can come down this road right here, this road right here, and you can basically attack where the ROT is in the Foxtrot, which is a very strong position to attack quickly. That's one thing that you can do, which is very strong. The other thing you could do is you could instead focus on getting units very early on into Alpha to once again surround the town like this, and then take Alpha Town. In the meantime, though, you do have to be putting like recon and ATGMs here, so that they have to really focus on building up for this push. Now, this is very, very, very risky, but if you absolutely wipe your opponent and you see that this town right here might be open, you can try... wrong color, sorry. You can try to send things up on this road into this town. It's very risky, though. And probably won't work against a good opponent, but against someone who's being lazy, it could work. Now, the other case, if they're not lazy, though, is if your helo drop, bordering on a helo rush in all honesty, is successful, then you don't necessarily have to unload in this town, and you can probably drive straight in and play very, very aggressive. And if you manage to get this area, then this is exceptionally good for you, because you can put AT-gems in Delta Town and this town right here, and they're going to have a very hard time holding Foxtrot and holding Delta. So you'll probably be completely winning at that point. Once again, it is a gamble though, because a lot of people open with A. A lot of people on the side will open with AA down this road, or rotate their A like this, or have like a K52 or Ninja or Tiger, and you will take losses in your helo drop. Usually when I do this, I try to have a recon helo, the helo from my CV, and then 1 to 2 infantry I'm going to helo drop in. And I'll try to put the empty transports ahead of the full ones. That way they absorb missiles. Now, if there is AA coming down this red line right here, you could run into problems, and you're basically going to have to probably cheese them if you actually want to get this helo drop off, or you'll probably lose everything, or you have to be conservative. You will have to make quick decisions though, because it will be very hard to spot the AA until it's too late. So yeah, this push works best in the opener, because that's when your chances of losing are the lowest. After that, though, it's iffy. Now, what happens though if you do lose? To be honest, oh, sorry, one more thing as well I forgot about. For tanks, you don't need that many points in tanks here. Basically, you need something that, coupled with the zoning material that you'll have in Delta, you can fight against your opponent's tanks right here. So anything from like 160 or 250 points for tanks. You could honestly go like 1 super heavy and you'd be fine, or you could go a little bit more, but you really don't need all that much. Because you'll have ATGMs here, and here, and in here. So the idea is to make it very hard for your opponent to actually play in this area. So yeah, you don't need too much, because you need a lot of infantry, but you need enough to make sure that you just won't get completely bullied, and that you can actually reasonably fight back. So what happens if you lose? In all honesty, if you do this opener and you lose, most likely you're going to lose big. You're going to lose a lot of infantry and you won't have that many tanks left over. So in all honesty, if you lose, you're kind of fucked. Um, if you manage, though, to maintain enough of your units, you can try really one of two things. You can try instead doing a Fox opener and transitioning into that, which we'll talk about next. Or you can reroute all the way into Alpha, which will be slower and give your opponent time, but at least you haven't lost right out the gate. These are things you may end up doing, specifically end up facing against Israel, because spikes in these towns are really frustrating to deal with, especially our favorite recon spikes. So yeah, you don't want to lose this, but you really don't want to lose this opener. You kind of have to win it, and you have to be willing to basically suffer a KD, losing KD in the opener for the position. Um, you're kind of fucked though if you lose it. So just don't lose the opener. Like it's stupid advice, but you really don't want to lose. If you want to play a little more conservatively and safer, you can try going with higher points in tanks right here. So and then really focusing on goods, like maybe going double mortar and really focusing on smoking everything out here so you can get in safely. That way, if you do lose the opener, at least you have more tanks left over to transition to somewhere else. So it's not the end of the world. But don't lose. It's a bad idea. And the last pure opener talk before we talk about splits will be the Foxtrot opener. Um, this is an interesting opener because not too many people do it. It's very risky because it's effectively an edge opener or offside opener. So if your opponent does that, if someone does this to you, a very natural response would be to just push the center of the map. So not too many people do this, but it certainly can be effective if you know what you're doing. Now, if you do know what you're doing, the idea of the Fox opener is you're going to control this area right here, and ideally get these spots right here as well. Um, and what this will do is this will force your opponent to rotate. Because if they don't rotate, you attack like this, you attack like this, you attack like this, and then they lose the game instantly. So any sort of tank that your opponent has, if it was here, will probably go like all the way like this, or come around through here, something like that. And then they'll be buying stuff here immediately. So this opener is unique because it will immediately give you initiative, because you're threatening their spawn basically if they don't do anything, and you immediately force a rotate where they have to rotate into you. If there is no rotate and there's basically a minimal response, you can push their spawn, and what the rotate itself will do though, which is the important part, is that the rotate will draw units away from Alpha Town and Alpha. And the idea of this is that you're going to exchange later on in the game. If you're going to exchange Foxtrot control for Alpha control, because they're going to be so busy rotating into you that you'll have time to build up a force composition to take Alpha Town, and it's a lot easier to defend Foxtrot as your opponent tries to push back in to retake it because you have so many spots for ATGMs. There are bonus points as well where if you're in this position right here and they don't invest enough into Delta Town, then maybe you can kind of come up through here and take Delta Town like this. Probably won't happen, most likely won't happen, but it's a possibility. So when you do this opener, it's very, very important that you maintain control of T-Forest with at least an ATGM pretty early on. What can happen if what can basically happen is the following. Let me get my eraser out. So if your Foxtrot opener goes well, but you leave T-Forest open, what your opponent will most likely do is they will invest into their spawn, so they don't die. Then probably invest into here, and their tanks can come like this. which is very common. What they could also do is they could invest for units to come like through here, and they could meet up with their tanks, and they can then counter push you into T Forest. If you lose T Forest to this push right here, and the position looks something like this, all of a sudden, all of these forces in Fox are isolated, and it's just a and because there are no reinforcements coming, it's not that hard to get rid of them. And now your opponent has a big advantage on you because they have T Forest, and because they surprise you, they'll probably be able to take Rectangle Forest as well, and you have issues. So when you do the Fox opener, you have to be very, very careful not to lose T Forest because this counter push is very strong if it's pulled off correctly, of course. Um, yeah. So if you have Fox, the idea is just reiterating one more time. You want to slowly put units into Alpha to retake it. If you want to be a little bit risky, you can try to move Recon up through this area and then into here to get ready to push Delta Town. You want to maintain lots of control of Delta so this type of counter push can't happen. And then you basically, well, if like we're exchanging things perfectly, you exchange Foxtrot control for Alpha Town control, like that, and then you devolve into one of the other cases that we've already covered. Um, Ideally, you maintain Fox control and you take Alpha Town, which can be a big surprise to your opponent. Um, but more often than not, you'll probably, if in taking Alpha Town because you're not investing into Foxtrot, you'll probably lose parts of Foxtrot, and that's okay because having partial control of Foxtrot and Alpha Town is very much worth it. So that out of the way, we get to talk about the fun openers, which are split openers. Um, and there are a few. The first one of which will be the Alpha Fox split. This is very, very, well, I'm using that word too much. This opener works great when you play with like motorized decks. And the idea is that you're going to go heavier into Alpha Town and lighter into Foxtrot, like this. The reason why is that most people open for Alpha Town to begin with, so you want to have a bigger force presence there, and then your smaller force in Foxtrot can be very cost effective. So once again, this works very well with motorized units, or motor decks just in general, because you can play wider a lot easier, and you can force your opponent to invest into multiple fronts where they may not be as cost effective. Like for example, if you are playing against a deck like USSR and you're playing a motorized deck, then this Alpha Fox split can be this Alpha Fox split can be very nice because USSR does not do well with multi-fronting as compared to a deck like Baltic or Eurocore. So if you're playing a motorized style deck when doing this, you don't really want to play too aggressive. Um, Sorry. Let me back up. When you do this, you really want to be applying a lot of pressure and foster. You want to be playing very aggressive. You want to make your presence known, so that your opponent diverts points away from the Alpha Town into Foxtrot. If your opponent does not invest anything there to in the opener, then you have the advantage of being able to set up really good positions. If you're aggressive, maybe you can even go to here and then try to come up through here, which your opponent probably won't be able to see. As you keep on investing in Foxtrot, and once you have those good positions, maybe you can pick up a CV if your opponent's lazy, or you'll pick up their first ATGM and then they're already down, or their first recon unit for this area, and then they're already down points. Um, in Alpha, what you basically do is, if you're playing a Moto style deck, you don't want to be playing too aggressively because your infantry doesn't have the ability to win this fight very quickly as you do in a Moto deck. If you're playing a Moto deck, play super aggressive to your heart's content. Now, if you're playing a Moto style deck and you can find a unit composition that works great for you, where you can play aggressive in Alpha Town and in Foxtrot, go for it. But it's my personal experience that this is harder to do while maintaining a full force composition without being too risky. So the idea of this is that um, if by forcing your opponent to respond to Foxtrot, you'll probably equalize your points there, and like the points you've invested there, if not, get a little bit more. But it's not really that big of a deal what happens because it just allows you to take Alpha Town easier because that's not where they're investing. If they decide to ignore Foxtrot and keep on investing into Alpha Town, then you can also keep on investing into Alpha Town, and you'll be playing at a slight disadvantage, but you now have Foxtrot control, and you can play aggressively with that. So, like, one of the things that I really like to do to make my presence known, to force my opponent to invest, is I will send, like, if I'm playing Moto specifically, I'll have like double auto cannon vehicles, or you can just take double transports as well that are loaded up. And you can try to actually just drive them straight into the someone's spawn if they choose not to respond to you. Or you can come like this way right here, or all the way around like that, and coming from this from this angle, which most people won't be covering from behind like that. Basically, the whole point of the Alpha Fox push is you have to make sure that they invest, and if they're not investing, make sure that really poke and prod them and make sure that they invest, or make sure that you win that Alpha Town fight. Now, the next type of split that you can do will be the Alpha Delta split, and there are two ways to do this. There's this way right here. I'll actually use different colors to number them. So there's the blue and the black right here. And then there is the blue and the yellow. Blue and yellow is really uncommon, and I know of two people who do this, one of which is myself. The other one of which I showed this person how to actually do this type of push. The idea of what you're basically going to be doing on the blue line right here is the same as what you would be doing in the Alpha Fox. However, you're going to be investing some points into Delta Town because you can control Delta Town and win the Alpha Town fight eventually, or drag it out long enough to cause problems for your opponent. Then you basically can win the game very early on. It is a gamble though. So how does this work? Well, if you take the black line here, you will be running into their forces head on. So you will probably need to be investing more points, which will be more visible. And you might be able to draw their tanks like this way potentially, because if you're doing this with a heal drop, they will see you early on, and you might be able to confuse them. That's one thing, the one approach you can do. Again, you have to keep in mind you will have to accept that you will be losing units, and you have to really basically play off this gamble. The sneakier option is the yellow road. The yellow road takes a lot longer to use, and that in this case is actually an advantage, because what you can do is you can invest a minimal number of points, 150 points right here, or less, honestly. And because it takes less time, because it takes more time, your opponent will see this blue line first, and they probably won't really be able to tell that you're down 150-ish points or something like that. Now, because people in general underinvest in Foxtrot, especially in the opener, what will probably happen is if they have an ATGM here and they see all your units here and they see nothing from this side, what often happens is their units move here to make sure that their zoning is even more effective. As a result, this entire area is left open. So you can often just drive in there with like a double stack of Legion 90, a double stack of Norlandsiger, Buffaloes, VDV, SASF, whatever. And then because you have really high quality infantry here, that bonus points if it's like recoilless rifles like Lucky Pagoda, if you can zone as well, you can very quickly clear this town block, and all of a sudden the Alpha Town fight is a lot easier for you, and now you can invest like proper AT gems into this town block, into Delta Town. This is riskier though, because sometimes You will find people who don't move their ATGMs here, so you have to have like something cheap you're willing to lose as you drive in. You have to have some AA as well. Like cheap AA works best because the most common response to this is a helicopter. Like if you're playing against DGC, you can almost be guaranteed to expect an escort to pop up or a tiger to pop up. So that's one reason why it's risky. So you have to invest those points as well, and if they don't move, it can be a little bit iffy. But so you have to have a lot of fire support, a lot of burst DPS basically to be able to get in. The other reason why it can be risky is if your opponent has stuff right here, you will be taking losses. And you will basically lose this area right here. So that's why this is a kind of risky move. Like I'll pull out in ranked every now and again, or in tournament games or whatever, just games in general every now and again. But it's something that I can't show all the time because if I do this all the time, I will get counter-stratted. The less risky approach that you could do is the Alpha Fox split. The one that showed where you come down this road right here, or you could also use this road and do something like this, where you come down through here and you try to attack the ROT and Fox right away, rather than take this, then this, and then this. There are timing advantages and disadvantages to both, which I'll go over in the opener at least in a second. But yeah, this yellow line push where you come into here, very, very sneaky. If you can pull it off, incredibly effective. Sadly, though, I don't think, and I could be wrong, but I don't think doing a main opener into Foxtrot on this yellow line works very well. And the evidence I have for this is basically a Putin Raz game where Putin did this and lost the opener and then lost the rest of the game. And I later looked at the game and I realized that I don't think this works. The reason why is you're caught very much in this open area right here, where your opponent will have plenty of time to rotate into you like this. And it's going to be very awkward for you, and you have to deal with their tanks, and you have to deal with a garrison town with lots of ATGMs in it. The big difference between doing your main opener here and your main into this black circle versus your main opener into this like yellow area right here is if you open into main open into yellow, they won't be rotating their tanks to deal with you. Or in the case of if they're coming from here, you won't get completely fucked this way. But if you open into the blacks area, they're going to realize, hey, something's not up. I don't see my opponent. I'm going to start rotating, or I'm going to be hyper aggressive. And you kind of avoid that by not doing a pure opener into this area right here. If you do a pure opener into Foxtrot in like this area, maybe even split it up into here as well, you don't have this issue because the rotation time on this red line is long enough such that you're okay. So alpha delta splits are pretty risky, but if you can pull them off, they work very, very well. Now, the last kind of type of split that you can do is the Delta Fox split, where you attack Delta Town and you attack Foxtrot. You have to be pretty confident with your ability to actually take Delta Town in the first place when doing this. Otherwise, you can't really afford to not invest points here. And really, this is more of a thing you do with spec decks, honestly. Because when you play this with unspec, you kind of have to monofront it, unless if you're playing a very motorized style and you're very comfortable with your deck. The idea is you come through here. Sorry, I should not be using black, I should be using blue. The idea is that you come through here to take this, but then also you're going to come around like this area right here. So the idea is that you grab both of these at the start. If you grab both of these at the start, then going from here to here shouldn't be too hard for you. And you can basically try to go into at this point, start immediately investing into alpha. So that your opponent's very zoned out. Basically, the idea of this is you focus on zoning and map control as opposed to just map control. Of course, because more things are going on and you're spread out more, you have less points in one area, so you have to be more efficient with using your points. But yeah, those are kind of all the splits that you can do on this map. The Delta Fox one is just essentially a Delta opener with a little bit of an extra flourish into Foxtrot. Um, it's not too hard to execute if you have Delta down, but get Delta down first. And yeah, those are the splits and the main openers that you can do from bottom side as well. Um, Before I talk about timings, which will be the last part of this video, it is my personal wish that less people would open into Alpha Town like this as their only opener. Because that's what frankly makes this map boring. I think that if more people did more interesting openers, where they open Rectangle T, or they try to do Delta Town openers more often, or Foxtrot openers more often, or Split more openers more often, then that becomes a lot more interesting. Um, so it's partly my hope in making this video that people will start to play this map a little bit differently and not have every single game be a carbon copy of the next, where it's just a micro fest and that's it, but playing with a little bit more strategy. Um, like, for example, as a Moto player, because if you play Moto, you can't do the same openers every single time into here that the opponent would be doing, so you have to be doing split openers where you really focus on zoning and Charlie. That's not something that's in the sort of standard repertoire of I only push Alpha Town. So that little rant aside, I'd like to have hopefully people play more interesting openers, but yeah, I will talk about timings in a second. I'll be right back. And now we get to talk about timings, the last part. So the first timings that I will show from both sides will be the timings on reaching Alpha Town. I will show for what this recon helicopter right here can see. Um, the helo drop starting from here, where I'm going to helo drop into this area right here. And so that's a little off slightly. I have some motorized units and some mechanized units to show. Let me just move that back a touch. So I'll make everything as fair as possible. So I have moto stuff and I have mech stuff to show. Close enough, I guess. And similarly as well from here. Moto, mech, I got my helo drop, and I have another helo drop for the town, so you can see what it's going to look like. I'm only going to show one direction with a tiger and this helo drop for the town, because it's basically symmetric. But yeah, so let's get everything going. So I'm going to have everything just kind of fast move over to here. Similarly, I'm going to have the leopard and the Vab fast move this way as well. Like that. This helo drop is going to drop right here. And I'm going to have this helicopter coming basically to here for the helo drop. This tiger, oh, I got critted, of course. So I guess I have to wait. Okay, let's try this again. These guys go here. This guy goes forward. This guy's going to helo drop here. This is going to be coming for a helo drop here. This will be helo dropping for the town. The leopard and the Vab, or one Vab rather, be driving here. And that's all I need for this side. So let's go ahead and see what happens. So because this map is a pretty basic map, you can see, going back to slow, the timings are essentially symmetric here. The tiger here would be around this point here, the halfway point. This is 250, this is 290 speed, which is why it's a little bit off. Anyway, going back to fast, just so you can see everything. So this would be dead to wheeled AA. However, if tracted AA, it would be fine. And these reach this heel drop spots at essentially the same exact time. And the timing here is perfect to get to this town and here. So by extension, it will be the same for mechanized units too. Nothing really too fancy here. Okay. Next thing to test will be the time. Well, not test. We'll show rather. Will be the timings for Delta towns, so you can see what it's supposed to look like. So we'll go back to bullet time. I'm going to have the AMX and the VAB. Sorry, not the AMX. The VAB and the AMX 13 rather. Yeah. Be going for Delta Town. And I'm going to be showing you two different timings. Of few on the ground, two on the ground. The helicopter I'm going to send here. I'm going to have these two guys come here to start, and they're going to take the road that starts here and goes this way. These guys are going to take the longer path to go down here into the town like this. So that's going to be the VAB and this AMX right here. And I'm going to remicro them along the way just so that everything moves in the exact right path. For demonstration purposes, of course. So, here we move. And everyone's moving. We'll speed it up for a second. So you can really see here that these motorized units are going to get to this town first. There's basically nothing you can do about it. So you have to be careful of wheeled AA. However, if they go all the way... Stop this. If they keep on going straight through here, you can definitely maybe hit them, especially with Tiger. Definitely maybe. That's great English. With these guys right here, though, it's very clear that you can shoot mechanized units coming into here before they can actually get into the town. Now we can see everything going here. Okay, I actually screwed up this motorized timing with this, so we'll just be relying on the mech timing. So we have plenty of time to actually get into this area. So ignore the motorized versus motorized. The main point of concern, as you can see, is the mech versus mech timing right here. Because the whole point of this was just to show you that the motorized units don't beat the motorized units here. So I'll have these move off to the side. It's not important. What you can see here, though, is that the timing is essentially close enough. In this case, it's actually faster with the mechanized unit. Funny enough, with this one, funny enough, that you might as well be taking this path right here. Now, because the timing here was so quick, these units can actually push into this area in the opener, and this area in the opener, a lot faster, and this mechanized unit will be back here by the time they would meet. So you have to be careful if you're trying to push Delta Town about getting pushed from this direction right here, where you could have a force composition that's not necessarily great for what you want to do, for the type of push that you're trying to execute. So I'll move all this over. And the last thing to test, or rather to show, is the timings into Foxtrot. Does it make sense to go into Foxtrot from this road or from this road? So I'll have a wheeled unit here, and actually we need another mechanized unit. Sorry. I'll spawn that real quick. Just so you can see how the timings work out is all. Alright, I'm going to have this just go here. And I have a couple units here to show you what this will look like as well. In fact, I'll actually buy some more here to so I can take some extra paths that I just thought of. That I wasn't planning on showing, but I can definitely show. So I will need another AMX and another reservist. Show this. Sorry for the kind of sloppiness here.
Good enough.
Des clients pour une course en taxi?
And that is good enough. Okay. So,
Besoin d'un coup d'œil, mon colonel?
I'm going to have this top AMX go here on this road, and this bottom AMX will be going to the ROT and Foxtrot. Similarly, this AMX 13 will be going here, and the other AMX 13 will be going toward the ROT and Foxtrot. So you can see this. From here, I'm going to have both. I'm going to have the going to this spot right here, and from this side as well, because this right here is a good spot to put ATGMs or here. But we can basically figure out where the timing should be just from this one demonstration. So, let's go. As you can see right away, this path is a lot faster. The reason why people don't necessarily take it in the opener, I'm not sure why these are doing what they're doing right now. The reason why people don't necessarily take this one in the opener is because of the fact that putting stuff here makes it easier to micro. I'm really not sure why they make this path right here, but whatever. Not a big deal. We're still faster, as you can see.
Un bon éclaireur est un éclaireur mort, qui dit.
So you can see there's a pretty significant timing difference, even with this path bugging and not functioning properly. And you can also see what it's going to look like with the mech units as well. How you have plenty of time to stop in this right here or this right here, even with the pathing bugging. I've never actually seen it do that before, but there you go. So those are in essence all the opener timings that you actually have to see on this map, and all the timings just in general. And that concludes the way I see it Mudfight. I think for the next one I'll do either plunging or hell. And yeah, until the next time, catch you later.